Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. I'm pretty sure we were involved in some weird couple's killing spree last night. My boyfriend and I's families are big campers. We try to go as often as possible and try finding different places, depending on the weather and season. We booked a beautiful spot on Lake Powell and had been anticipating this trip for months. Imagine our shock when we get to our site to discover that the lake had flooded most of the campsite with the exception of ours, the one next to it, and then one about 100 feet away. We didn't get to enjoy the lake because there was no beach access and the water wasn't safe. We shrugged it off and set up our camp as usual. At about 7 in the evening, we see a car pull into the campsite right next to ours. No big deal, we just go about our night. I noticed that they were not in a hurry to set up camp. A middle-aged man and woman got out of the car. I'm a very observant and paranoid person, so I notice details that most people may not think anything of. In my mind, these campers arrive really late after check-in, and they don't unload anything from the car. They didn't talk to each other, and they just kind of looked into our site in passing. Okay, no big deal, I think. A bad storm hit us a few hours later, and we were literally holding down our tents while the couple next to us just sat in their car. No tent whatsoever. I still thought this was odd, but my boyfriend said they probably were car campers and had the back set up to sleep in. Okay, makes sense, I guess, but still, why come to a tent campground? We go to sleep and all is well. That is until I'm awakened by the sound of footprints in our vicinity. We had been drinking, so the fact that this noise woke me up means it was very close to our tent. I sprang up and listened. I heard people walking up to our tent, and I saw the silhouette of a man through my tent. In a state of panic, I unzipped the tent and looked outside. 2 people with red headband flashlights are standing about 7 feet from me. I rush myself back into the tent and grab my pepper spray. During all of this, my boyfriend wakes up asking me why I opened the tent, and I explain what I had just seen. His reasoning is that it was the neighbors just gathering firewood, and I can't shoot them for that. Immediately, the people walk away, and we don't hear anything else. I take a moment to think that maybe I'm being paranoid, and I'm also a little hungover. I try going back to bed, but I can barely sleep. The next morning we wake up, and the couple next to us has what looked like a tarp tied from one tree to another. I'm thinking, what the hell is that? I noticed that the man has the same khaki long pants he had on the night prior, and the woman is also wearing the same clothes. This in itself isn't weird while camping, but what was weird is that they were not dressed for camping. It's hot, and the clothes they were wearing were not what you would wear in this environment. Long pants almost like to protect you when you go through the woods to hijack another site, is what I thought. We go about the day, and I keep noticing that the couple doesn't seem to interact with each other at all. They don't talk, and they start a fire in the fire pit for making lunch, taking it very easy. My boyfriend and I's family decide that due to the weather and the lake we would head home early. Well, the couple next to us, who had literally just started a fire, immediately packed up and left just as we started to pack. They left in a hurry. We finished packing and get to my boyfriend's parents' house, and we decide to stay for a while. Well, I told my boyfriend's parents about the whole thing and how odd it was, and what they told me chilled me to the core. They said that the man, upon arrival, seemed to be antagonizing the dogs to see how they would react. They weren't sure why he took this stance, but after me telling them this, we put our stories together. They pointed out how the man would stand and stare at the dogs, while the woman was acting busy, doing absolutely nothing, but just moving around. They also noticed that there was minimal interaction between them, and they just seemed to stare at us. My boyfriend's parents said that one of the dogs would occasionally growl throughout the night, and they didn't get much rest. When I brought that up to my boyfriend, he said they were probably just getting firewood. My boyfriend's parents both said, why would they go out of their way to collect firewood that has been heavily rained on? And why wait until we go to sleep and then pack up the next day and leave? So this is what I think. I think these people were locals who knew the condition of the campsite and scoped it out. They noticed our site was reserved and isolated. No one else was there but us and them and some other campers pretty far apart. I think they camped out to either rob us or murder us. But then they heard my boyfriend say something about not shooting them, and they didn't know it was in reference to the pepper spray, and they decided to back off. They then spent the afternoon observing us until they saw us leaving and decided to call it off. None of their behavior makes any sense otherwise. To this day, I'm convinced we narrowly avoided becoming victims of something terrible that night. I lived in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in western Virginia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Richmond and other places, a lot of people where I live are really struggling. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and power company employees, the only employment in the area is at Dollar General, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great campsites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shady people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along the roads meant for a four-wheel drive. Some of the people you see in the cars look like they're up to no good. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp, however you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like four-wheel drive vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. My F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table, nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck lights running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that's more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jake and I, decided to take a look. My other friend Isaac decides to stay behind to make popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek. But it seemed strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jake and I started talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jake tripped and yelled, "Oh shit." A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We looked at each other and decided that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all. We walked back in silence and kept looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple 100 feet from the campsite, I can see Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd. We said to each other the fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well at this point. We'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes. He mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. "They're locked up in the cabin of the truck," he said. "Did you unlock it?" We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all of our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnet fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. "Isaac, what were you doing after we left?" I asked. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess," he responded. "But you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets?" Isaac said that he'd been in the tent since we left, and that he'd been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150, and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand right on top of the hump. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but luckily it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer, though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again, though. We never found out who was walking around our camp that night or who was following us in that vehicle. But something tells me we were lucky to get out of there when we did. There was something very wrong about that place, and I think we were being watched the entire time we were there. I'm a 25-year-old Australian who recently visited British Columbia, Canada, with my family for a 2-week hiking adventure. We were exploring the remote wilderness areas around Jasper National Park, taking in the breathtaking landscapes and diverse wildlife. The park itself is massive, covering nearly 7 million acres of pristine wilderness. During our stay, we met Mike Peterson, an experienced local guide who offered to take us deep into the park's backcountry. Mike had been leading tour for over 15 years and knew the terrain like the back of his hand. He told us stories about the local wildlife, including the elusive mountain lions that roamed these parts. The morning of our hike was perfect clear skies, no wind, and the majestic Rocky Mountains towering in the distance. We could see the snow-capped peak of Mount Robson, the highest point in the Canadian Rockies, piercing through scattered clouds. Along the trail, we spotted moose grazing peacefully and golden eagles soaring overhead. Being from Australia, where our largest predator is the dingo, seeing these powerful North American animals was absolutely mesmerizing. But the real magic was in the landscape itself. The raw, untamed beauty stretched as far as the eye could see, different from anything I'd experienced in the Australian outback. As we hiked deeper into the wilderness, Mike mentioned that we could split up to explore different areas if we wanted. He explained the trail system and said we could meet back at designated points. My family preferred to stick to the main trail, but I was itching to explore a particularly interesting ridge I spotted in the distance. Being the adventurous soul I am, I decided to break away from the group. Before leaving, Mike warned me about the local wildlife, particularly the mountain lions. He mentioned there were only about 30 of them in this vast area. A few days earlier, I'd seen pepper spray at the park store for $70, but thought it was just another tourist trap. I set off toward the ridge, pushing through dense undergrowth. The late afternoon sun was intense, and sweat beaded on my forehead as I made my way up the steep slope. After about 40 minutes of climbing, I finally reached a good vantage point. The view was incredible, but the real challenge lay ahead, the ridge itself. As I traversed the ridgeline, the wind picked up, offering welcome relief from the heat. I noticed some interesting tracks in the dirt, but didn't think much of them at the time. After reaching the summit, I launched my drone to capture some footage of the stunning landscape. Not a single animal was visible in any direction. I had never felt so alone, yet so at peace. Looking for my return route, I spotted a stream below that seemed to lead back toward our meeting point. Rather than retrace my steps through the thick brush, I decided to descend toward the water and follow it down. The park rangers had advised making noise while hiking to avoid surprising any wildlife. So I played some music from my phone and sang along as I walked. 20 minutes into my descent, I heard rustling in the brush. I froze. Everything went quiet. Then, after about a minute, I cautiously moved forward. That's when I saw it. A massive mountain lion burst from the undergrowth, moving uphill while letting out a terrifying snarl. It stopped about 200 feet away on higher ground, turned, and stared directly at me. I quickly snapped a photo, knowing nobody would believe this encounter otherwise. Then reality hit me. I was alone in the wilderness, face to face with one of North America's deadliest predators, with no cell service. I kept my eyes on the cat while slowly moving sideways along the stream. The mountain lion began paralleling my movement, maintaining its distance at first. Then something changed. The big cat altered its course, beginning to move directly toward me. At about 150 feet, well within what rangers consider the danger zone. I started shouting and raising my arms, trying to appear larger and more threatening. The mountain lion seemed completely unfazed. When it closed to about 100 feet, it released a bone-chilling roar and charged down the hill. Time seemed to stop. I remembered all the advice about standing your ground during a mountain lion encounter, but this felt different. This wasn't a bluff charge. This cat had been studying me, had gotten close, and was now coming with clear intent. I was utterly alone, no cell service, and no one would hear me if things went badly. I had mere seconds to react. The terrain offered one possible escape, a large Douglas fir, about 30 feet away. As the cat disappeared momentarily behind some brush, I sprinted for the tree. I could hear it crashing through the vegetation behind me as I scrambled up the trunk, my heart pounding in my chest. I climbed as high as I dared, looking down just as the mountain lion reached the base of the tree. It circled the trunk several times, occasionally standing on its hind legs to reach up toward me. For nearly 2 hours, I remained in that tree, watching as the predator patrolled below, occasionally disappearing into the brush only to return again. As dusk approached, the cat finally moved off into the forest. I waited another 30 minutes before carefully descending and making a mad dash toward the main trail. I ran nearly 2 miles before reaching the ranger station, where I reported the incident. The rangers confirmed from my description that this was likely a young male lion known to be unusually aggressive. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was. The experience taught me a profound respect for the raw power of nature and its apex predators. The next morning, we found fresh mountain lion tracks near our campsite, a chilling reminder of how close I came to disaster. For months afterward, I had vivid dreams about those intense moments. The image of that powerful cat charging down the hill is forever etched in my memory. I still love hiking and exploring, but now I always carry proper safety equipment. Sometimes the most beautiful places hide the deadliest dangers. I was on my first solo backpacking trip in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. My plan was to summit Thunder Peak over 2 days, camping overnight before tackling the final ascent. The trail there is absolutely stunning, winding along the edge of a dramatic valley before climbing up to the summit ridge, offering breathtaking views of the surrounding wilderness. About 3 miles into my climb, a faster hiker caught up to me. Instead of passing by with the usual quick nod, he slowed down and matched my pace. Something felt off about him from the start. We talked, but his manner was unsettling, too intense, too eager. His enthusiasm seemed forced, almost mechanical, like someone trying to imitate normal human interaction. He reminded me of those old documentaries about cults, where the members speak with an artificial cheerfulness. At one point, he started talking about how he loved pushing himself to extremes, but couldn't feel excitement anymore. "Nothing really gets my blood pumping like it used to," he said, with an unnaturally wide smile. His presence made me increasingly uncomfortable, so I made an excuse to stop for lunch. He continued up the trail, and I hoped that would be the end of our interaction. The rest of my day was peaceful, and as his strange behavior faded from my thoughts, I found a beautiful campsite on a small ledge overlooking the valley. As night fell, the usual backcountry jitters set in. My mind kept returning to that strange hiker and his oddly artificial behavior. It didn't help that I was cowboy camping, sleeping under the stars with no tent. To ease my anxiety, I placed my hunting knife within easy reach beside my sleeping bag. I eventually drifted off while listening to some history podcasts on my phone. Surprisingly, I slept deeply through the night, not waking once. When morning came, I felt unusually well rested, until I went to grab my stove from my backpack. The pack was exactly where I'd left it, leaning against a pine tree about 15 feet from my sleeping pad. But every single pocket was open, every zipper unzipped, every snap undone. Even the sleeping bag compartment was open. The mesh interior pockets were all unzipped, yet nothing was missing or moved. My heart started racing as I realized someone had methodically opened every closure on my pack during the night. I looked down at my knife beside my sleeping bag. The snap on its sheath had been undone too. I didn't waste any time. I packed up faster than I ever had before and practically ran down that mountain. Sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that don't make any obvious sense, like someone taking the time to open every pocket of your backpack while you sleep, but taking nothing. That strange hiker made me realize that sometimes the most dangerous predators in the wilderness walk on two legs. I grew up in Montana, but for some reason, we always went camping in Idaho. I was about 12 years old, early 90s, when this happened. It was dark, and we were camping in the mountains. I woke up either very late at night or very early in the morning. It was still dark out, and I was freezing. I decided to get in our station wagon to warm up, climbing over my brother and waking him in the process. Of course, he said he needed to use the bathroom, probably just wanting to follow me around like younger brothers do. Once we got out of the tent, I noticed a strange red glow across the mountaintop. Being a country kid who'd never seen a major forest fire, I pointed to the light and told my brother that the sun was rising in a weird place. He, being in the Boy Scouts, knew better. "That's not the sun," he said with growing concern in his voice. "That's fire." This woke our parents up, and when my dad stuck his head out of the tent, his face went pale. The forest fire was spreading quickly, and we were right in its path. We grabbed our belongings lightning fast, not even taking the tent down properly. Just collapsed it and shoved everything into the back of our old Ford station wagon. Dad drove as fast as he dared on the narrow, winding gravel road. He kept telling us everything would be fine, but I could hear the tension in his voice. The smoke was getting thicker, making it harder to see. Between the lack of guardrails and what looked like endless darkness below us, I was terrified. We hadn't been driving long when we saw the flashing lights of a Forest Service truck coming from one of the side roads leading to another campground. The ranger flagged us down and spoke briefly with my dad. He confirmed the fire was moving fast, but assured us we had enough time to get out safely if we kept moving. That didn't stop my dad from driving like we were in a race. I didn't feel truly safe until we reached the main road. miles away from the campground. To this day, whenever I see footage of people escaping wildfires, I get that same knot in my stomach, remembering that night and how close we came to being trapped. Looking back, I'm amazed at how quickly a peaceful camping trip can turn into a life-or-death situation. Nature may be beautiful, but it demands respect and can turn dangerous in an instant. My girlfriend and I went camping at Pine Ridge Campground last spring, one of our first trips together. I wasn't sure about her comfort level with wilderness camping, so I booked a spot where you could see neighboring campsites, not too remote, but still surrounded by beautiful forest. We arrived late afternoon and set up our site right away. Later that evening, while we were enjoying dinner and drinks around the fire, a lone camper pulled into the site closest to ours and started setting up. He came over to borrow my mallet for his tent stakes. He seemed quite shy and reserved, barely making eye contact while we talked. We invited him to join us for a drink later if he wanted, thinking it was the neighborly thing to do. He came back with my mallet and stayed for a while, though he hardly spoke, content to just observe our conversation. Something felt off about him, but I couldn't quite place what it was. Some time passed, and my girlfriend decided to head to bed. I stayed up a bit longer, and our neighbor quietly left without a word. I did the bedtime stretch and the old, well, I'm getting tired routine, then headed to our tent. As I was falling asleep, I noticed his car was running, but the lights were off. Strange, but I figured maybe he was charging something. I woke up in the pre-dawn hours, needing to use the bathroom. His car was still running, which seemed very odd. When I returned, our car door was wide open. Nothing was missing, and there was no explanation for why it would be open. The whole situation felt wrong. My girlfriend and I convinced ourselves we were just being paranoid, that maybe we'd forgotten to close it properly. But we both knew we hadn't. If I was being honest, something about that guy had seemed off from the beginning. We packed up and left before sunrise, and I still sometimes wonder what might have happened if we'd stayed. Looking back, it seems clear we may have avoided something sinister. Sometimes the best thing you can do is trust your instincts and get out of a situation before it turns dangerous. The wilderness can be peaceful and beautiful, but it can also provide cover for those with bad intentions. When I was a kid, we used to go camping every summer at Lake Superior. One year, my sister and I decided we wanted to sleep in our small tent instead of the family RV. The tent was set up right in front of the camper, and we were excited about our little adventure. We didn't even make it through one night. Every so often, we would clearly hear something rubbing against the bottom of the tent. We were absolutely terrified, convinced someone was crawling around outside. I don't remember exactly how we got out of there. I think we eventually started screaming for our parents. Our father came out to investigate, and we tried sleeping in the tent again, but the strange sounds continued. We ended up retreating to the safety of the RV for the night. A few days later, when my father was taking down the tent, we discovered the source of our terror. It turned out that a family of groundhogs had built tunnels directly under our tent. When they moved around in their burrows, they would brush against the tent's floor. We hadn't noticed anything during the day because we were using air mattresses. But at night, we could hear them moving around beneath us. The whole thing seems pretty funny now, but at the time, it was absolutely terrifying. We were convinced something sinister was trying to get into our tent. It's amazing how the mind can turn something as harmless as burrowing animals into a source of absolute terror, especially when you're young and in an unfamiliar setting. I'd say the most immediately dangerous situation I've ever faced was getting caught in a severe thunderstorm while camping in the Green Mountains of Vermont. The storm that swept through was basically a massive wall of wind that could rip trees right out of the ground. But believe it or not, that wasn't even the scariest part of that night. I had set up my tent under a sturdy wooden pavilion, thinking I'd be protected from the storm. Unfortunately, a large black bear had the same idea about seeking shelter. And let me tell you, it was not happy about sharing the space. I've encountered plenty of bears outside my tent while camping, but this was different. This clearly frightened and agitated bear kept running circles around my tent, seemingly trying to decide what to do with me. What made it particularly terrifying was hearing its claws clicking against the concrete floor of the pavilion with each galloping stride. The sound of those claws tapping against the concrete, mixed with its heavy breathing and angry huffing, created a terrifying symphony. Add in the howling wind tearing apart the forest around us, and you've got yourself a horror movie scenario. Usually, black bears are easily scared away. They typically run at the first sign of human presence. But this storm had this bear so worked up that no amount of shouting or aggressive noise-making would convince it to leave the safety of the pavilion. It just kept circling my tent, occasionally venturing out for a few seconds only to return even more agitated than before. All I could do was wait it out, passing the time by duct taping my hunting knife to my hand in case things went south. The bear was clearly as trapped by the storm as I was, and neither of us had many options. It was one of the longest nights of my life, listening to those claws clicking against the concrete, wondering if the bear would eventually decide to investigate my tent more closely. The experience taught me that even typically predictable wildlife can become unpredictable when they're scared. That bear wasn't acting like a normal black bear, because it wasn't in a normal situation. Sometimes the most dangerous encounters are the ones where both you and the animal are trapped by circumstances beyond either of your control. I just returned from a 2-week kayaking expedition down the Columbia River with my friend Riley. And I've got a terrifying story from our final night. We were camping on an isolated stretch of shoreline, simply enjoying our last evening in the wilderness. What happened that night has left me deeply shaken. Around 2 a.m, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. Riley was still sound asleep in his tent, so I quietly made my way down to the river's edge. The night was cool, with just enough moonlight to see by. The river flowed gently, and the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I stood there, I heard a sharp crack, something moving through the underbrush. My first thought was deer, but then I heard it again, louder this time. My heart started racing. I froze midstream, unable to move. That's when I saw it, a massive wolf standing just 8 feet away in the shadows of the trees. I can't describe the feeling that washed over me. My heart stopped, My breath caught in my throat, and my body just locked up. The wolf was lean and muscular, its fur silvery in the moonlight, and those amber eyes were piercing right through me. We just stared at each other, neither moving. My mind was racing through everything I'd ever read about wolves. Should I run? Stand my ground? I was completely frozen. The standoff felt like an eternity, though it was probably only minutes. The wolf didn't make a sound, no growling, no movement. Just those eyes locked onto mine. Then I saw its muscles tense, and I thought for sure this was it. But instead, the wolf turned and silently disappeared into the forest. I stumbled back to camp, woke Riley, and told him what happened. He was skeptical at first. Wolves are rare in this area, but I knew what I'd seen. We couldn't sleep after that. Every snap of a twig made us jump. Then it happened again. I heard movement, closer this time, right outside our camp. Looking through the tent screen, there it was again, this time only 2 feet away, moving slowly past our tent. My heart was pounding as I watched the wolf's silhouette slip by. We immediately packed up our gear and launched our kayaks, paddling through the darkness to find a new campsite across the river. The next morning at a local diner, we told some residents about our encounter. They looked surprised, saying wolf sightings were incredibly uncommon in that area. I still don't know if I was just lucky, or if the wolf simply wasn't interested in me as prey. Either way, that night taught me that no matter how prepared you think you are, nature can humble you in an instant. The wilderness isn't something to take lightly, and neither are its inhabitants. I'm an experienced hiker, and I recently went on a trip to the Norwegian fjords with a group of friends. We planned to stay at a mountain shelter before tackling some peaks the next day. For those unfamiliar, these shelters are basic structures in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes old farmhouses, sometimes simple sheds free for hikers to use. We found ourselves in an old wooden shelter built in the early 1800s. It was 2 stories, spacious enough for our group to spread out upstairs for the night. The weather was cold and damp, so we had the fireplace roaring to keep warm. It was one of those perfect nights when you're in the middle of nowhere. Everything's quiet, and you're just listening to the crackling fire while chatting. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. Not from a noise, but from an overwhelming feeling of discomfort. I lay there for a few moments, trying to shake it off, when I heard something. The front door of the shelter creaked open slowly, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. Heavy, deliberate steps, like someone walking around the main room. I froze. My mind started racing, trying to figure out if one of us had gotten up. The footsteps continued for a minute or two, slow and steady. And then there was the unmistakable sound of the door slamming shut. After that, complete silence. By this point, we were all wide awake and fully alert. None of us wanted to say it, but we all felt the same way. We were miles from anywhere, and it didn't make sense for anyone to be walking around at 3 in the morning. We couldn't ignore it, so we all decided to check things out. We tiptoed downstairs, not saying a word to each other. The tension in the air was palpable. We opened the front door and stepped outside into the pitch-black night. There was nothing, no headlamps, no sound of footsteps, not even an animal in the distance. This was a remote spot, hours from any roads. Nobody should just be wandering by, especially at that hour. We looked for signs of anyone camping nearby, thinking maybe someone had pitched a tent and came in looking for shelter from the cold. But there was nothing, no trace of anyone at all. Just the cold night air and the howling wind. The next morning, while packing up, we learned from a local guide that this shelter was known for strange occurrences. Many hikers reported hearing footsteps when no one was around, or feeling like they were being watched. The more I thought about it, the weirder it got. I'm not one for ghost stories, but I couldn't help feeling there was something off about that night. It wasn't just the footsteps or the door slamming. It was the silence afterward, how everything went still, and how we couldn't find anyone nearby. I've stayed in many remote places before, and never experienced anything like that. People talk about the energy in certain places in the mountains, but I'd always dismissed it as superstition. Now, though I'm not so sure, that night made me reconsider what I believe is possible in these ancient, isolated places. I'm a long-distance hiker. I've completed the Pacific Northwest Trail twice in both directions, and have hiked many sections of the Continental Divide Trail. In all my time outdoors, I've probably spent over a year collectively sleeping in the wilderness and covered more than 2,000 miles. I've only encountered 3 bears and a handful of coyotes, smelled 1 mountain lion, and heard another calling nearby. I'm not big on supernatural stories, but I have one that makes me question everything I believe. In 2022, I was hiking the Pacific Northwest Trail northbound with my wife and our friend. We were about halfway through when we decided to camp in Eagle Valley. The previous year, I'd enjoyed fishing there, and the gentle river that winds through the meadows makes a perfect spot to swim and filter water. As we made camp, I noticed a large elk about 30 feet away, staring at us. It approached closer, so I yelled to scare it off. It circled our camp before wandering away. I decided to catch some fish before sunset, thinking we might have fish tacos for dinner. The women agreed to finish setting up camp while I went fishing. Near our campsite was a massive boulder, about the size of a 2-car garage. As I passed it heading toward the river, I noticed a young man walking around it toward me. This was odd because it was getting late, when most hikers are already setting up camp. I was also confused about where he'd come from. He wasn't on any trail, just walking through the meadow away from the main path. As he got closer, I noticed he wore only a small day pack, blue running shorts, and a white t-shirt, all spotlessly clean. After days on the trail, clean clothes like that are unusual. He seemed to be following me, so I stopped and said, "Hey man, how's it going?" He replied with a flat hello in an eerily monotone voice. Then he asked, "What are you doing?" When I explained I was fishing, he asked, "What will you do with the fish?" in the same unsettling tone. I told him I planned to eat it if it was big enough. He passed by me, but then stopped 20 feet away, turned around, squatted down, and watched me fish. When I caught one and started cleaning it, he asked, "How does it taste?" with an unnatural smile that sent chills down my spine. The man mentioned he was hiking 30 miles that day, then stood up and walked off into the woods, not following any trail. He disappeared into the trees. I returned to camp without mentioning the encounter to avoid frightening the others. That night, we all woke up to strange sounds outside our tent. Something was moving around in our campsite. This happened repeatedly throughout the night. Every time we checked, we found nothing, but the silence afterward was deafening. Later that night, I woke again and looked over to see both my wife and our friend asleep. I heard the sound once more and grabbed our bear spray. When I unzipped the tent, there he was, the same man, about 15 feet away, on all fours in a push-up position, staring directly at me with that same unsettling expression. Then he crawled backward into the darkness with inhuman speed. I woke up relieved it was just a dream, but in the morning, our friend asked if I dreamed about something outside the tent. They remembered seeing the man by the river, but had no memory of falling asleep despite something clearly being outside. We all agreed there was something deeply wrong about that place. I rarely tell this story because it sounds unbelievable even to me, but it happened. I will never camp in that meadow again. I've been feeling completely burned out lately. Work stress, family drama, constant social media noise. I needed to escape, so I decided to go on a solo camping trip. I found this remote spot through a wilderness camping app. No marked trails, no designated sites, just pure isolation with mountain views. I arrived late afternoon, as the sun was setting behind ancient pine trees. The silence was immediate and absolute, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. I quickly set up camp, built a small fire, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful night of solitude. As darkness fell, I noticed something odd. It was too quiet. No birds, no insects, not even leaves rustling. Just complete silence. I tried to ignore the unsettling stillness, focusing instead on my campfire's comforting crackle. Then I heard it, a soft creaking sound from somewhere in the forest, like wood bending under weight. At first, I assumed it was just a branch moving in the wind, but then it happened again. And again, the creaking grew louder, more deliberate, circling my camp. It wasn't random anymore. It followed a pattern, like something methodically pacing around my campsite. My heart racing, I grabbed my flashlight, only to find its batteries nearly dead. I decided to investigate anyway. Walking away from camp, I ventured deeper into the woods. The ground beneath my boots was oddly soft and damp, despite no recent rain. The deeper I went, the more the trees seemed to close in around me. That's when I saw it, a figure barely visible between the trees. Just a shadow, too far to make out details, but definitely human-shaped. I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. Before I could approach, my instincts kicked in and I bolted back toward camp. When I reached my tent, I stopped cold. The ropes had been untied, the flap was open, and my sleeping bag was scattered across the ground. Everything had been rifled through, yet I'd only been gone a few minutes. I spent the entire night awake, listening to movement outside my tent. Something was out there, circling, waiting. When dawn finally broke, I packed up faster than I ever have before. I didn't even stop for breakfast. I just wanted to get out of there. To this day, I question what happened that night. Was it my imagination? Sleep deprivation? Or was there really something out there that didn't want to be seen? Whatever it was, I'll never camp alone in those woods again. During my first autumn in Quebec in 2019, I traveled around for 3 months in Thunder, my converted camper van. By late September, tourism had slowed significantly, and I often found myself alone on backcountry trails and in campgrounds, especially midweek. After camping for a few days in a remote corner of Mont Tremblant Provincial Park, I decided to drive towards North Bay, gradually making my way back south. Tired and with sunset approaching, I turned onto a dirt road, drove another 30 minutes, and parked by one of the lakes marked on my map. I witnessed a stunning sunset, heard wolves howling in the distance, and got a nice fire going. I felt that familiar sense of peace that comes with being alone in the wilderness. Then I heard an engine in the distance. For the first time in 3 months and 4,000 kilometers of travel, I felt genuine fear. This was a dead-end road. Whoever was coming would likely stop here. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. While I always left detailed hiking plans, I'd gotten lazy about letting people know where I camped each night. The vehicle approached, its lights visible through the trees. I grabbed my axe, closed all the doors, and crouched behind the dark side of Thunder, away from the fire. There were several clearings around the lake. I hoped they'd choose a different spot. Instead, the car pulled up right next to mine. I considered greeting them like any other camper, but something kept me hidden. In seconds, I planned escape routes, realizing the darkness would make running through the woods nearly impossible. I heard their car door open and someone step out. Not wanting them to find me crouching with an axe, I opened my driver's door and slammed it shut hard, trying to sound intimidating. Immediately, I heard their car door close, engine start, and they drove to the far end of the lake. I quickly extinguished my fire and jumped into my van. Thanks to my camper setup, I didn't need a tent, but I still slept terribly. Every sound jolted me awake. At one point, I had a vivid nightmare of hands reaching through my window. At first light, I rushed away. To this day, I don't know who pulled up beside me, though I wonder if I scared them as much as they scared me. While our minds can play tricks on us in the wilderness, sometimes our gut feelings warn us of real danger. Now I always tell someone where I plan to stay when I'm traveling alone. Sometimes the scariest part of being in nature isn't the wildlife. It's not knowing the intentions of other humans you might encounter. In May 27, when I was 20, I attended a friend's band performance at a remote field in rural Wales. The location was literally a field among fields, about an hour's drive from the nearest town. One of the band members knew the landowner and had permission to use the space. Several cars were already there when we arrived. I came with my friend, his sister, and 2 others, packed with tents, sleeping bags, and plenty of drinks. The field was L-shaped, with tents set up around the corner and the band's generator across the field. Behind the tents, a gap in the hedge led to another field where people went for privacy. About 40 people gathered as the band started playing. Whenever I needed the bathroom, I went with my friend's sister or others. No one wanted to go alone despite being in the middle of nowhere. Around 3 in the morning, exhausted, I headed back to the tent I was sharing with my friend. As I zipped up the tent, someone started tugging at it from outside. I assumed it was my friend until I heard an unfamiliar voice demand, "Let me in." When I asked who it was, they replied, "I know you're alone in there. You can't hold the zipper forever. For what felt like forever, I gripped the zipper and tent fabric, fighting to keep this stranger out. Several times, they managed to pull the zipper up slightly, but I always pulled it back down. The whole time, they kept saying things like, "I'm going to get in eventually, and it's going to be worse if you don't let me in." Then I heard my friend's voice boom out, "What are you doing at that tent?" followed by the sound of a punch and a thud. My friend had watched me walk to the tent and noticed this guy following me. He'd kept watching, and when he saw the man approach my tent instead of heading to the bathroom field, he came to check on me. A fight broke out, and surprisingly, one of the creepy guy's friends ended up hitting him too. We later learned he had a history of harassing women and had previously been caught watching people sleep. Given how loud the music was, no one would have heard anything had he managed to get into my tent. A few weeks later, my friend saw him again and said his lip was still injured and would likely scar from the 2 punches. It's terrifying to think what might have happened if my friend hadn't been watching out for me that night. When I was 6 years old, my mom, an emergency room nurse, often had to work weekend shifts. During these times, she'd take me to stay with my friend Katie. Katie's family lived on a large property with a huge yard, farm animals, and multiple siblings. Her father was a sturdy man who kept 3 guard dogs that patrolled their land at night. One particular night felt different. When I arrived, excited to play with Katie, I noticed none of her siblings were around. When I asked Katie about this, she just shrugged and said they weren't home. We spent the evening looking for barn cats and playing until bedtime. Katie had bunk beds, and she always let me sleep on the top bunk. I loved looking out the window in the morning to see where the guard dogs were kept, since we weren't allowed near them. This was my only chance to observe them. I fell asleep quickly, but woke to a strange feeling. Opening my eyes, I saw a small boy, maybe 5 years old, wearing a white t-shirt and denim overalls. We stared at each other for a while. Assuming he was one of Katie's siblings, I told him to go back to sleep. He looked at me blankly before turning and running into the dark hallway. Later, I woke again when something touched my foot. The same little boy was at the end of the bed, looking over the rail at me. I tried to wake Katie, but she was a heavy sleeper. Annoyed at being woken up again, I gave him one of my toys and sternly told him, "It's nighttime. We'll get in trouble if your dad sees you awake." He looked sad, as if he understood, then slowly climbed down and ran off again. I woke just before dawn to an unusual silence. No guard dogs barking, not even birds singing. Through the window, I saw the boy running across the yard into the woods. Feeling uneasy, I woke Katie and told her about her brother running into the woods. She looked confused and said, "It's just us and my dad here." My heart dropped, but I said nothing more. When my mom picked me up, she explained that Katie's mom and dad had divorced. And this was Katie's last weekend there, before moving away with her mom and siblings. That explained why no one was home that afternoon. But it didn't explain the boy, or why the usually vocal guard dogs had gone silent. To this day, I don't know who that boy was or what he wanted, but I often wonder what would have happened if I had followed him out to play. This happened 30 years ago, but the fear I felt remains vivid in my memory. I was in college, taking an outdoor survival course that culminated in a 3-day solo wilderness experience. We could only bring basic supplies: an empty backpack, canteen, sleeping bag, knife, 6 matches, rope, a plastic sheet, spare clothes, water purification tablets, and a small cooking pot. No food or water was allowed. We had to find everything ourselves. After being dropped off, I had to hike in to find a campsite, first placing a marker flag near my drop point so I could be located 3 days later. I felt completely at peace, just nature and myself. Even as darkness fell, I enjoyed the wilderness sounds around me and didn't mind not having a tent. I built a small fire and slept well that first night. I woke up thirsty and began searching for water. I found a muddy stream, let the water settle in my pot, added purification tablets, and boiled it for good measure. It tasted terrible, but at least I was hydrated. Everything went smoothly until the final day. Early afternoon, time to break camp. I cleaned up and hiked back to my drop point. While waiting against a tree, I heard a vehicle approach. A truck I'd never seen before pulled up, driven by a stranger. He gave me an odd look and asked what I was doing there and if I was alone. I lied, saying my friends were behind me breaking camp. He gave me a knowing look, got back in his truck, and drove off. My instincts screamed danger. I ran into the woods to hide, and soon heard his truck return. I stayed absolutely still as he got out, called for me, and searched through the brush. Eventually, he gave up, and I heard him drive away. I couldn't risk returning to my drop point, so I hiked through the woods hoping to find base camp. After what felt like hours, I encountered a forest ranger. I explained who I was and what happened. He told me I'd made the right choice. A young woman had been assaulted in the area the previous night, and law enforcement was searching for the perpetrator. Later, I learned another student in my class had encountered the same man the night before. She'd scared him away by blowing a whistle until help arrived. If there's anything to learn from this, it's to always trust your instincts and never camp alone. My mother worked as a head night shift nurse at an exclusive wellness center, where wealthy people paid thousands to stay for 6-week treatment programs. The facility sat on 600 acres of remote wilderness, an area known for strange occurrences. This story happened when I was 12 years old. Our single-story house sat atop a hill, with only one other residence nearby. Every night, Mom would drive her car to the clinic, about a mile away on a gravel road. You could always hear vehicles coming or going because of the loud gravel crunching under tires. Early that week, she had lost her keys and was using her spare. One night, I was in my bedroom playing video games when I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to turn everything off and pretend to be asleep. My heart started racing for no apparent reason. Within 5 minutes, I heard my door open, but I hadn't heard any car approach. Heavy footsteps slowly moved through the living room, as if searching for something. They continued into the kitchen, which connected directly to my room. The kitchen light switched on. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. But that same mental urge screamed, "Don't move. Don't make a sound." The footsteps stopped at my doorway, and I felt someone staring at me. After what seemed like forever, they slowly walked out. I waited 20 to 30 minutes before moving, afraid they might be waiting outside. I called my mom to ask if she'd come home. She hadn't. We changed all the locks and added a security bar after that. It was one of the scariest experiences of my life, but just one of many strange stories from our time living there. Looking back, I still have trouble believing these things happened. It seems too bizarre that someone would break in just to stand and watch a child sleep. Years ago, I was walking my dog with my sister at a local ranch near our house. The owner, a kind woman who still runs it today, allows the public to use the property and woods for dog walking, as long as pets stay leashed near the animal enclosures. The ranch is quite large, with a small forest at the back that's usually deserted. We always felt safe there because we'd known the owner since childhood, and the surrounding walls were too high to climb easily. We entered the property and headed toward the woods where we could let the dog off-leash. The forest path circles the ranch, so we usually just do one loop before heading home. As we walked along chatting, we noticed a man sitting on a fallen log ahead of us. He wasn't drinking coffee from the ranch cafe or walking a dog. He was just sitting there, staring straight ahead into the trees. As we approached, he suddenly turned to us and said in a monotone voice, "The only way out is over there," pointing into a dense section of woods. We ignored him and continued walking. We told the ranch owner about the strange man, and she said she hadn't seen anyone enter the woods before us. She went to investigate with us, asking us to show her where he had pointed. The spot he indicated led to an old wall that used to separate the ranch from abandoned railway tracks. The tracks hadn't been used for 30 years and were now completely overgrown and desolate. We never understood what he meant about that being the only way out, and the whole incident left us feeling deeply unsettled. Neither we nor the ranch owner ever saw him again. Sometimes I still wonder about his cryptic message and why he chose that spot to deliver it. This is a short but strange encounter I had while driving through Nevada's mysterious Valley Highway. During high school, my parents and I would take spring break trips to Las Vegas, driving all the way from Oregon and making stops at interesting places along the way. One year, we were on the mysterious Valley Highway, making our way toward Vegas. Being 15 and fascinated with paranormal phenomena, I thought this was incredibly cool. As we drove along, I noticed a white van with government plates. I looked at the drivers, and I kid you not, it was two men in black suits wearing sunglasses. They even had earpieces. I thought, no way, this is too perfect. I tried waving at them, but they didn't respond. I watched as they turned onto a dirt road that led out into the middle of the desert. It was such an odd experience, easily explainable, but the timing and location made it feel surreal, like something straight out of a movie about government conspiracies. Sometimes reality can seem stranger than fiction, especially in places already known for mysterious occurrences. This incident happened in 2021, and I still can't shake the feeling that the person we encountered that day was a dangerous predator lurking in one of America's most beautiful places. My sister and I were taking a road trip along the Pacific coast, and we decided to spend the afternoon exploring Redwood National Park. For those who haven't visited, the park features a winding road that takes you through ancient forest giants, with various stops where you can park and explore different trails and viewpoints. We had only made it to our second stop when we encountered him. The parking area was fairly simple, just a wide gravel lot with educational signs, and a path leading to one of the massive redwood groves. As we started walking toward the trail, a tall, thin man in what appeared to be a park ranger uniform was coming down the path. He looked out of place somehow. His uniform was too clean, too new, and he moved with an odd, jerky motion. As we passed each other, he muttered something under his breath. My sister asked him to repeat himself, and he seemed startled for a moment, as if he hadn't expected us to acknowledge him. Then his face twisted into an unsettling smile, and he pointed into the distance, asking, "Have you seen what's over there?" All we could see was the regular park infrastructure, a utility shed, and the continuing trail. We politely said no and tried to continue on our way, but then he called out, "Such pretty hair you both have." The comment made my skin crawl. There wasn't anything overtly threatening about his words, but something in his tone felt deeply wrong. We quickened our pace and headed up the trail. After about 15 minutes of exploring, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. My sister voiced the same concern, saying that ranger hasn't left. He's been standing by the information sign this whole time, just watching us. From our elevated position on the trail, we could see him clearly. He had positioned himself at the edge of the parking lot, partially hidden behind a sign, but with a clear view of our location. We tried to continue our visit, but the constant feeling of his eyes on us was unnerving. When we finally returned to the parking lot, he had disappeared. We got in our car and drove to the next viewpoint, which featured some ancient Native American rock art you could view through provided binoculars. As we approached the narrow entrance road, an old Jeep Cherokee pulled in front of us, blocking our way. It was him. After a moment of intense eye contact that made my sister physically shudder, he slowly pulled aside. We entered the lot, and he drove away. We told ourselves we were being paranoid, but decided to spend extra time at this stop to ensure we wouldn't run into him again. The next stop was a mile-long loop trail, about 4 miles ahead. We thought we'd given it enough time, but we were wrong. About 2 miles down the road, we spotted the Jeep pulled over on the shoulder. The man was standing beside it, holding what looked like a professional camera with a long lens, seemingly photographing the landscape. But as we passed, he turned and tracked our car with his lens until we disappeared around a bend. When we reached the trailhead parking lot, we were both badly shaken. My sister, who normally dismissed such concerns, was so disturbed by the man's behavior that she grabbed a small hammer from her emergency car kit and put it in her pocket. It seems ridiculous now, but at the moment it felt necessary. The trail descended into a beautiful grove, winding between massive redwoods. We had made it about halfway around when we spotted him at the top of the trail, near the parking lot, watching us through his camera lens. We continued walking, hoping to finish the loop before he decided to come down. But when we emerged from a particularly dense section of forest, we realized he was gone. As we climbed back up toward the parking lot, we spotted him waiting by an information sign, camera in hand. Now there was something else too, a tripod with what looked like professional lighting equipment. As we approached, knowing we'd have to pass close to him to reach our car, he turned toward us and said, "Hey, I'm working on a park photography project. Would you mind helping me out?" I'm running out of time." My sister firmly said, "No, leave us alone," and we kept walking. His response chilled us both. "Well, that's too bad. Beautiful subjects, both of you." Then he started following us, gaining ground quickly. We barely made it to our car and locked the doors before he was right there, pressing his face against my window, staring in with unblinking eyes and holding up his camera. I forced myself to look directly at him, refusing to show fear. His expression was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A cold, predatory stare combined with an unnatural smile. My sister started taking photos of him with her phone as he circled our car, trying to prevent us from leaving. We began inching forward, but he wouldn't move. Then we noticed a family having lunch a few cars over. They were watching the situation intently. The man noticed them too, and his demeanor instantly changed. He gave us one last twisted smile and stepped aside just enough for us to leave. As we drove away, I saw the father from the other family giving us a supportive nod, as if to say, we saw everything. We were ready to help. I immediately called the park office and reported the incident. They sent rangers to investigate, and later that evening, we received a call informing us that they had detained the man for impersonating a park ranger and harassing visitors. I've tried to find out more about what happened to him, but I've been unsuccessful. I often wonder how many other visitors he might have terrorized before he was caught, and what his true intentions were. The camera equipment, the fake ranger uniform, it all seemed too well planned, too calculated. I'm just grateful we encountered him in a public place, and that other visitors were present. I can't shake the feeling that we narrowly avoided becoming victims of something far worse than harassment. While traveling down Interstate 80 late one afternoon, I noticed a silver Volvo pacing me in my blind spot and blocking me in my lane. I gave them a moment to pass, and when they didn't, I began slowing down. They matched my speed perfectly. This continued for several miles, and my polite "go ahead" wave was completely ignored. Finally, tired of going well under the speed limit, I took advantage of my better acceleration to make a path ahead of them, shooting off at about 95 miles per hour. They immediately sped up too. They stayed within sight of me for the next 25 miles, matching my speed, whether I went 55 behind a slow truck or nearly 100 miles per hour. They wouldn't pass, wouldn't drop back, they just kept following. I managed to maneuver through traffic in such a way that I could exit the freeway without them being able to follow, and I pulled off to get some gas. I did my own thing and rejoined the freeway, only to pass them sitting on the shoulder a short way up, as if they had been waiting for me. Now I was really spooked. I didn't see them again for a few miles, but then here they came again, tailgating me. They stayed within sight of me for the next 45 minutes or so, matching my speed and lane selection perfectly. At this point, I'd had enough. I again maneuvered through traffic and forced them beside me. The middle-aged couple inside the car were staring at me with the most intense look of hatred I've ever seen. I'm not ashamed to admit that my blood ran cold when I saw the look of pure rage in their faces. I gave a "what did I do?" sort of shrugging gesture, and the male passenger gave a sarcastic, slightly crazed-looking smile, and did a "you better think" gesture at his head, followed by the universal signal for cutting a throat. The female driver was all over the road as she stared at me, forcing me over partially onto the shoulder. Incensed and obviously nervous, I gave them the finger and pinned the throttle. I took off at go directly to jail speeds. I didn't stop until their car faded into the distance. And then I took an alternate route through some more curvy country roads and made sure I disappeared. I'm reasonably certain that I didn't cut them off prior to this incident, and I didn't recognize them at all. I have no idea what their problem with me was, but I'm kind of glad that I didn't give them a chance to tell me. The look in their eyes still haunts me. It wasn't just road rage, it was something deeper, something more disturbing. Like they had chosen me for some reason I'll never understand. First of all, I'll set the context. I was living in Munich, and my boyfriend at that time lived about a 5-hour drive away in Frankfurt. I planned to go see him using the popular ride-sharing app BetterRide. I'd used it many times before without incident. I noticed a young man named Thomas was heading that way, and there was already one seat taken by another girl named Anna. I reserved my seat and waited for Thomas to come and fetch me. We met up at the spot we agreed to, and he explained to me that Anna had to cancel last minute, which seemed odd but could happen. Anyway, I got in. Thomas seemed very nice and talkative. Just before leaving Munich, he turned to me and explained that he'd forgotten his driver's license at home and that he must go fetch it, which was already a bit concerning because it was on the other side of town, and Munich is huge. Let's be honest, you know you're going away for the whole weekend, and you have a really big journey ahead. How do you forget your license? Anyway, we got to his place, and he parked up and turned to me and said, "Would you like to come up and visit my place?" I quickly declined. As we continued our journey, he started talking away and suddenly began touching my thigh. He explained that he was a personal trainer and masseuse. I made it quite clear that I was heading to my boyfriend's and that I was not comfortable. He continued touching my hands, my thighs, and my neck. At that point, I was wondering if I should get out, but I was already on the Autobahn, about 2 hours away from Munich, and we were stuck in traffic. The 5-hour journey was turning into 7. My plan was to pretend to be asleep. I thought that way I wouldn't have to interact with him, and he might leave me alone. The thing is, I really fell asleep. When I woke up, I realized we were in the middle of nowhere, on tiny roads in the middle of the Black Forest. Thomas turned to me and said, "You know, if I wanted to, I could take you into the woods right now." I played tough and said, "You don't scare me, and I'm prepared for all situations." He took no notice, and fortunately, my boyfriend called me at that point. I explained the situation and kept him updated on the phone. As we came out of the woods, Thomas decided it was time to eat, so we lost another 45 minutes while he did his own thing. I told him that I was fed up and wanted no more stops. He told me that he was tired and that in order to stay awake, I must massage him. I felt totally trapped, so I briefly touched his neck just to appease him, hoping he would continue driving. We finally arrived, and I made sure my boyfriend wasn't there waiting, because I didn't want there to be a confrontation. I reported Thomas to the ride-sharing platform, and he has now been banned. The whole experience taught me to be much more careful about who I ride with, even through official platforms. I still think about how differently things could have gone if I hadn't been able to stay calm, or if my boyfriend hadn't called when he did. It was around 2 in the morning, and my sister Emily was driving us home from a friend's house. We lived in a rural area where the roads were mostly empty at that hour. This particular road was quiet and isolated, the kind that during the day was just a regular busy route, but became eerily desolate at night. Emily was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. We were chatting aimlessly, not really paying attention to much around us, when I noticed something up ahead. It was in the middle of the road, blocking our path. At first, I thought it might be a fallen branch, or maybe an animal. But as we got closer, I saw it more clearly. It looked like a large bundle of rags or old clothing, a tangle of fabric scattered across the road. It didn't seem to be moving, but it was positioned in such a way that seemed odd for it to just be there. It was too big to be just trash, and too out of place for something that would naturally be left on the side of the road. We slowed down, trying to figure out what it was. I remember feeling a sense of unease. Something about the way it was just there felt off. I pointed it out to Emily, and she squinted through the windshield. "That's strange," she said. "It looks like a pile of clothes or maybe a blanket." I agreed, but the longer I stared at it, the more unsettled I felt. It was just sitting there in the middle of the road, completely still, as if it had been placed there intentionally. No sign of anyone nearby, no car headlights or sounds of movement. We were getting closer, and I started to feel that nervous tension you get when you're not sure what to expect. Then, as we approached, the pile shifted. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Maybe the wind had moved it, or maybe there was some animal underneath the fabric. But then I swear I saw it move more deliberately. And then, just like that, it wasn't a pile of clothes anymore. It was a person. A man was standing there in the middle of the road. He wasn't there a moment ago. 1 second it was a lump of fabric, and the next it was a person standing there, holding something. A large bag, I think. His clothes were disheveled, and he looked like he'd been out there for a while. He didn't seem to notice us at first. He was just standing there as if waiting for something, or maybe just lost in his own thoughts. But then something about his posture made me feel uneasy. He wasn't just standing casually like someone waiting for a ride or trying to flag us down. He was standing in a way that made me feel like he was blocking our way on purpose, like he didn't want us to pass. He wasn't making any movement to step aside, or even acknowledging the fact that we were right there. I didn't want to stop, but Emily, trying to be polite, slowed the car even more. We were only a few feet away now, and I could see his face more clearly. It was hard to make out in the dark, but what I could see didn't help my gut feeling. His expression was blank, but there was something cold about it. He didn't look like he needed help or was lost. He looked like he was deliberately waiting for us. Emily rolled down the window a bit, and before she could say anything, the man stepped closer. Not in a rush, but slowly, deliberately. He didn't say anything at first, but as he came closer to the window, his body language changed. He was almost blocking us in, and I felt like there was no way out if things went south. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, her voice wavering a little. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, too close now, staring at us with this blank, unblinking look in his eyes. I didn't hear him say a word, but his presence felt suffocating, like he was making sure we couldn't just drive off easily. My heart was pounding now. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what exactly. We had the option to drive off, but I was too shaken to make a move. It felt like if we drove away, he would follow, or worse, like he might be waiting for something. His body language was strange, too still, too deliberate. After what felt like an eternity, Emily mustered up the courage to say something again. "Okay, well, stay safe," she said, trying to get us out of there. She quickly rolled the window back up, and I thought he might finally step aside, but he didn't. Instead, he just watched us, unmoving, until we started pulling away. We didn't look back, but the whole drive home was filled with nervous silence. We kept trying to explain it away. Maybe he was just a random person. Maybe he needed help. Maybe he was a drunk guy who didn't know where he was. But the way he stood there, the way he blocked our path, and the strange blankness of his stare didn't sit right with us. There was no sign of distress, no explanation for why he was acting like that. It felt like we had narrowly avoided a situation that could have turned very bad. We kept asking ourselves, why didn't he speak? Why didn't he step aside when we asked if he was okay? Why did he make us feel like we just couldn't drive off like normal people would? Over the years, we've tried to rationalize it, but it still doesn't add up. Maybe he was just a troubled man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But something about the way he acted felt threatening, like we were in danger. We've heard similar stories from other people who have had weird encounters with strangers on isolated roads at night. And it always leaves us wondering if we were lucky to get away. When I got my driver's license, I was eager to hit the road. Our family always took a trip to Lake Superior, and I'd been going for years. But when I turned 17, I was adamant that I should drive there myself. I kept bugging my mom about it, convincing her that I was more than capable of making the drive. After a bit of begging and probably some eye-rolling, she finally agreed. I think she'd figured it would be a good opportunity for me to get some real experience driving longer distances. The whole trip was pretty uneventful until we hit the last leg of our journey. We were in the middle of nowhere, just rolling through the back roads with barely any street lights. I'd been driving for hours, and it was dark by this point. The kind of dark where the only light you could see came from the headlights of the car. But as we got closer to the cabin, I could see the shimmering lake off to the side of the road. I knew I was only 15 minutes away. I had the windows down slightly, the radio on low, and was just cruising along. And then out of nowhere, this guy appeared. I swear to God, he just materialized. We were coming around a sharp blind curve in the road, when suddenly, this man wearing nothing but swimming trunks and flip-flops was right in front of us. I don't even think he was paying attention. He was just walking in the middle of the road like it was no big deal. I have no idea how he got there, but he was there, and he was moving way too slowly for me to stop in time. I didn't even have time to think, just react. I slammed the steering wheel to the right, swerving hard to avoid him. I missed him by maybe a foot, probably only inches. I couldn't believe it. My heart was pounding in my chest as the car jolted back into the lane. I'm not exaggerating when I say it felt like a miracle that I didn't hit him. It happened so fast, and I don't even remember how I managed to avoid him without crashing into something else. I immediately pulled over to the side of the road. My hands were shaking, and I was just sitting there trying to calm down. I was freaking out. My mom, who was sitting next to me, was totally silent for a second. Then, in typical mom fashion, she asked if I was okay, but I could tell she was just as rattled as I was. We both sat there for a minute before she told me to call the cops. I did, and I explained what happened, how we almost hit a guy who was walking in the middle of the highway. I told them we thought he might be drunk or something, because who walks in the middle of the road like that at night? The dispatcher just sighed and said, "Yeah, it happens a lot out there. We'll send someone." She sounded so nonchalant about it, like it was a common occurrence. We sat on the side of the road for a while longer, just trying to catch our breath. And I was honestly kind of shocked at how quickly I'd gone from having a fun drive to nearly wrecking the car. I mean, I had swerved to miss a man in swimming trunks and flip-flops at 9 o'clock at night on a dark highway. It felt completely insane. After a few minutes, a sheriff's car passed by us, headed toward the area where I'd nearly hit the guy. I don't know if they found him, but when they drove by, it hit me. There's a reason the dispatcher was so nonchalant. Apparently, this wasn't a rare situation. There was a popular bar and motel a mile or so up the road, and from what I gathered, this kind of thing happened all the time. Drunk people wandering onto the highway, not paying attention to the traffic, and getting into all sorts of trouble. There were white crosses along the side of the road, in memory of those who didn't make it out of those situations. I've never been able to shake the image of that guy in the road. I can't help but wonder what he was doing there, why he was so oblivious, and whether he realized how close he came to being hit by a car. My heart still races when I think about how easily everything could have gone wrong in those few seconds. It's terrifying to think about how things might have turned out if I'd reacted a split second slower or swerved the wrong way. Luckily, I didn't hit him, and we made it to the cabin safely. But I couldn't help but feel this weird mix of relief and unease for the rest of the trip. Every time we passed that stretch of highway during our vacation, I couldn't help but glance over at the spot where it happened, just wondering if that guy was still out there somewhere, or if I'd narrowly escaped becoming one of those statistics marked by a white cross. One time I got sent home early from work because I was sick, and I decided to take the longer and slower but safer, easier way home. The normal way takes 25 to 30 minutes, but depending on the lights, this way is more like 40 minutes. I didn't have to concentrate on the road as much since I wasn't feeling well. I was going through the town, managed to make all the lights so far. It's like 3:15 in the morning, so no one's on the road or anything. It's a cool, misty night, and as usual, I get a red light, so I slow down and stop. I know this light is going to take a while, so I whip out my phone to find a new song. And as I'm scrolling through Spotify to find one, I hear a bang on my passenger side door. It scared the life out of me, and I dropped my phone on the floor. I looked over, and at first, there's nothing at the window. But then slowly, a middle-aged drunk man rises from the bottom of the window, smiling like a creep, and just stops in the middle of the window and slowly starts tilting his head side to side. Needless to say, that's the only time I've ever run a red light, and I touched speeds I never thought my car could reach. I kept checking my mirrors, but thankfully, he wasn't following me. I took a different route home, just to be safe, and kept all my windows rolled up tight. Another time, I was taking my normal way home. I normally finish at 6, but due to scheduling issues at work, I got sent home at 4 in the morning. It's around 4:20 now. I'm doing like 75 miles per hour on the back streets, heading towards my house. High beams on and music blaring, having a grand old time. I come around the corner, and it's quite a long road, but up the road a small ways, I see someone in the middle of the road wearing a white hoodie. So I flick my high beams off and start slowing down, thinking they were going to move. I stop, say 2 or 3 meters away from them, and see that it's a white sheet draped over a standing stick thing, with a piece of paper attached in big bold writing saying, "Come up close. Have a look." Now, I'm not sure if it was some teenagers having some fun, or if when I got out, I was going to get jumped. But not being an idiot, I very quickly floored it around the sheet and floored it home. I got home and made triple sure everything was locked. These experiences taught me to be much more cautious when driving at night, especially on quiet roads. You never know what kind of situation you might find yourself in, or what kind of people might be out there waiting for an opportunity. I still take that longer route home sometimes, but now I keep my doors locked, windows up, and I never stop at that red light anymore. I just slow down, check for traffic, and keep moving. Better to be safe than sorry. So I have a story that still creeps me out every time I think about it. It happened when I was 18, and my sister, who was 15 at the time, was with me. We had just gotten back from running some errands, and she needed a little extra practice behind the wheel. It was around 9 in the evening on a warm summer night, so we had the windows all the way down to get some fresh air. We made a quick stop at a gas station to grab some drinks before heading home. The station was on a quieter street, and it was pretty dark outside. There weren't any street lights near the gas station, so it was hard to see much beyond the area directly around us. The few cars that passed by were spaced out. It wasn't busy at all. We were the only ones there, or so we thought. As we were getting ready to leave, we heard a voice from the sidewalk. It was a woman's voice, raspy, but still loud enough for us to hear her clearly over the noise of the car. She was asking for help. I remember the tone of her voice clearly. It was in that middle-aged range, but something about it just didn't sit right with me. It was one of those gut feelings that you can't really explain. We looked around, but it was pitch dark beyond the gas station lights, and we couldn't see anyone. At first, I thought maybe we were hearing things, but then she spoke again. She started telling us that she needed a ride to her brother's house. She said she'd gotten off the bus too early, and now she didn't know where he lived, so she was stranded. It was so bizarre. She wasn't asking for directions, or even help in a normal way. She was demanding it, like we were supposed to just accept it and drive her wherever she needed to go. I wasn't about to give a random stranger a ride, especially not when it was this late, and there was something off about the whole situation. My sister and I exchanged a look, and we both instinctively locked the doors. But for some reason, we didn't close the windows. We just sat there awkwardly, waiting for the few cars that were passing by to hurry up so we could leave. The woman kept talking, saying she wasn't a sketchy person and that we could trust her. She tried to sound reassuring, but it only made things feel weirder. The more she spoke, the more I felt like something was off. I'm sure my sister felt the same way. Neither of us wanted to engage with her, but we were also too afraid to be rude or too blunt because honestly, I didn't know what kind of situation we were dealing with. We were stuck in this weird limbo, hoping the cars on the road would stop coming so we could leave. We said sorry a few times, trying to be polite, but clearly wanting to get away. Finally, after what felt like forever, the street cleared up a bit, and we took the chance to pull out and head down the road. But as we were driving off, I couldn't shake the thoughts that had been buzzing in the back of my mind since she first spoke up. I turned to my sister and asked, if she got off the bus too early, how does she even know where her brother lives? How could she not know how to get there on foot, but be able to tell us how to get there by car? My sister didn't really answer, but I could tell she was thinking the same thing. That whole situation didn't add up. She was claiming to not know the area, but then expected us to trust her enough to give her a ride. It didn't make sense. It felt like she was trying to play on our kindness, like we were supposed to just believe her story and offer help. But everything about it was strange. Once we were a few blocks away, we both sighed in relief. We were still a little shaken up, but the weirdest part was how calm and composed we'd been throughout the whole encounter. There was no panic, no alarm going off in our heads, just this slow-burning sense that something was wrong. In hindsight, I think that's the part that's always freaked me out the most. It's not always obvious when you're in danger, and when it's dark outside and someone's asking for a ride, it's hard to make that judgment call in the moment. After that night, my sister and I both agreed to never drive with the windows down like that again, especially when we're in unfamiliar or darker areas. That incident really stuck with us. It's easy to second-guess yourself after the fact and wonder what would have happened if we had actually given her a ride. Who was she really? Was she just some lost, confused person who needed help? Or was she trying to set us up for something? We'll never know. And part of me is glad we don't. But the whole thing made me realize just how important it is to trust your gut. In that moment, we had no reason to believe she was dangerous, but something felt off. We were so close to making a huge mistake, and it was a reminder that no matter how innocent someone may seem, you always need to be cautious. You can never be too careful when it comes to strangers, especially ones who seem to be asking for help in such a strange, desperate way. That night we decided we would always trust our instincts from then on. This happened a few months ago, and I've been meaning to share it because I still can't get it out of my head. I work night shift at a small regional control tower, and most mornings I'm driving home around 5 a.m., just as the world is waking up. That drive has always been pretty routine, but one winter morning, something happened that I can't explain, and it's been haunting me ever since. It was early one cold winter morning, about 5 a.m., when I left the tower after finishing my shift. I work in the control tower, so by the time I finish, it's still pitch black outside and the roads are practically empty. The kind of peace you only get in small towns before the world comes alive. I drive a little beat-up sedan, and the roads around here are narrow 2-lane highways that cut through fields and forests. The whole town is small and quiet, so when I'm driving home, there's nothing but the occasional flicker of headlights from the few cars heading in the opposite direction. It's always been a calm drive, just me, the road, and the soft hum of my car. That morning, though, everything changed. I was cruising down the road when I happened to glance over to my left. Out of nowhere, I saw something that made my heart stop cold. It was a face, a pale, lifeless face pressed right up against my driver's side window. I can't even describe how it felt in that moment. I honestly thought I was seeing a ghost. This face just staring at me through the glass was so close. It looked like a person was standing right next to my car. For a split second, I thought I'd driven past someone without realizing it. But there was no one on the road when I first looked. This face didn't belong there, and it didn't belong to anyone I recognized. I slapped my foot on the gas and swerved slightly, almost losing control of the wheel for a second. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I looked in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car or someone behind me. But there was nothing, just the same empty road. I kept driving, trying to shake off what I'd just seen, but I couldn't. The image of that face stuck with me, and I kept thinking about it on my way home. My shift at the radio station started a few hours later, and I had to get there and set up for my morning show. But the whole time, my mind kept racing. What the hell did I just see? When I got home, I tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. The face was still burned into my mind, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face again. It was like it was right there next to me, pressing against the glass. I had to figure out what had happened. I needed answers. After trying and failing to sleep, I decided to look up the local news. I figured maybe something had happened on the road that could explain what I saw. Maybe there'd been an accident or something that I didn't notice. Then I saw it. Man struck and killed by truck early this morning. I froze when I read the headline. My stomach dropped. The article said that a man had been struck by a truck on the exact stretch of road that I'd just driven on. According to the article, the man had been hit by a truck after running across the road in front of it. The truck driver had swerved, but the man didn't make it. The time was chilling. I'd been on that same stretch of road just a couple of minutes before the accident happened. I sat there staring at my phone, processing the news, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The face I saw, it wasn't a ghost. The man had been trying to throw himself in front of my car, but he hadn't made it in time. He was still alive when I saw him standing there on the road, but he had failed to step in front of my car, and the next car coming down the road, the one traveling the other direction, hit him. That was why I saw him so close to my window. He was trying to end his life, but he hadn't made it. His face had been right there, as if he was trying to make contact with me, almost like he was asking for help. And then just seconds later, he was struck by a truck and killed. I felt a rush of guilt and confusion. I was shaken, to say the least. I kept thinking about how I almost hit him. Was I supposed to do something? Could I have done something? I didn't know. I needed to do something. I wasn't sure if there was anything I could do, but I couldn't just let it go. The truck driver, the one who'd struck the man, he must have been devastated. That guy's life was probably wrecked after the incident. The guilt of running over someone would stay with him forever, even though it wasn't his fault. And what made it worse was that this wasn't a normal accident. The man had intentionally thrown himself in front of a vehicle. I called the police. I was hesitant at first, but I felt like I needed to at least try. I explained everything, how I'd been driving on that road, how I'd seen that man's face pressed against my window, how I later found out that he'd been struck by a truck. I told them that I wanted to let the truck driver know that it wasn't his fault. This man had been trying to end his life. He'd been standing in front of my car, trying to die. I needed them to pass that information along to the truck driver, so he wouldn't carry the weight of guilt for something he didn't do. The officer on the phone listened and seemed understanding, but he told me that they would need to look into it further. I thanked him and hung up. Days passed, and I kept thinking about the whole thing. I drove that same stretch of road again and again, but the image of that face was always with me. I never found out if the police had passed my message to the truck driver, and I never heard anything more about the accident. It still eats at me. I still drive that road every day, and every time I pass the spot where I saw the man's face, I feel a lump form in my throat. What happened to him? What about the truck driver? Was he able to find peace after all of this? Or was he carrying the weight of that incident with him forever? I'll never know. I don't share this story much. I expect people to call me crazy, but I swear something happened to me that night, and I can't explain it. It's been a few months, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. First, some background. I don't drive for medical reasons. I'm legally blind in my right eye, and I also have this thing where flashing lights like headlights or street lights trigger these massive migraines. It's like my head gets squeezed in a vice, and I lose all focus. So I rely on Uber and Lyft to get around. Honestly, I don't mind. It's easier, it's convenient, and I don't have to worry about causing a crash if I get a migraine while I'm behind the wheel. This particular night started off pretty normal. Or so I thought. I'd been out at a small diner in Pine Valley, a quiet little town about 40 miles outside of the city. It's the kind of place where people know everyone, so if you don't, you definitely stand out. I was hanging out with some old friends, just having a laid-back night after work. We weren't partying hard or anything. I had a few beers, but nothing too wild. Just enjoying the night. The thing is, Pine Valley is in a kind of remote area. It's surrounded by forests and farmlands, and at night, everything just feels empty. If you're out there late, you won't see many other cars or people, just the occasional fox or deer crossing the road. You know, the kind of place where the silence is almost deafening. Anyway, I was ready to head home. It was around midnight by the time I decided to leave. And since my house was about 45 minutes away, I figured I'd just get a lift and relax the whole way back. I usually go with the carpool option because I'm cheap, and it's easier on the wallet. Plus, I don't mind sharing a ride with a stranger, as long as they're not too weird. The car pulls up, and I get in the front seat as usual. No one else was sitting up front, so I took the seat next to the driver. He's this guy in his 40s, and he's been driving for a while. He looked tired but friendly enough. like he'd had a long day of driving, but was used to it by now. As we start driving, the phone dings and I see a notification pop up on the driver's screen. Rachel will be joining your ride. No big deal, right? Happens all the time. The guy pulls over to pick up the new passenger. And when she gets in, I'm not really paying attention at first. I'm just sort of zoning out, trying to make sense of the lyrics to some song that's playing on the radio. But when she sits down, I get this weird feeling. She was about my age, maybe a little older, with long dark hair and pale skin. She was dressed in this oversized, ragged-looking jacket that didn't quite fit her, like she'd grabbed whatever was closest in a hurry. The strange thing, she didn't pull out her phone, not once. People do that all the time. Text, scroll through Instagram, whatever. But not her. She just stared out the window, like she was lost in her own world. It felt wrong. But then again, maybe I was just overthinking it. I had a couple of beers, and the drive was long, so I wasn't in the best frame of mind. I let it go and settled back into the seat. The drive through the back roads started to get even quieter. We passed more farms, trees, and fields with no lights for miles. Not a single street light. The canyon roads around Pine Valley are pretty narrow, winding through the forest, and they're not the kind of roads you want to be on when it's pitch dark. If you break down out here, you're really out of luck. The driver didn't seem bothered by the silence, but I could feel myself getting more uncomfortable. It was almost like the world outside the car had swallowed us whole. The trees felt like they were closing in, and the road just stretched on forever. It's the kind of place where you get the feeling you're being watched, but you can't see anyone. And just as we're climbing up this narrow, dark stretch of road, she suddenly speaks. "You can let me off here." Now, I don't know about you, but when someone asks to be dropped off in the middle of nowhere, my immediate reaction is hell no. I mean, we're in the middle of a canyon with no houses around, nothing but trees and fields, and it's completely pitch black. It's the kind of place you don't want to be walking around at night, even if you have a flashlight. The driver seems to hesitate, but he looks at the map, and sure enough, it shows her destination as being right there, right in the middle of nowhere. He asks her, "Are you sure about this?" There's nothing around here. She doesn't respond right away. She just nods once, like she's made up her mind. Then she says again, "Let me off here." At this point, I can tell the driver is starting to feel a bit uncomfortable too. But what's he going to do? She's asking to be dropped off. So he pulls over, but before he can even take his seatbelt off to open the door for her, her door slams open. And just like that, she was gone. I don't mean she got out of the car and walked away. No, she was just gone. I turned around to look, and the back seat was empty. There was no sign of her, no footsteps in the gravel, no rustling of leaves, nothing. The door was wide open, and she was just not there. It was like she disappeared into thin air. Now, I don't know if it was just the fog of the night or if I'd missed something, but I swear to God, I looked everywhere. There was no way she could have sprinted off that fast in the dark. I didn't hear anything, no footfalls, no sound of the gravel crunching underfoot. It was just an eerie stillness, like everything around us had frozen. The driver was looking in the rearview mirror, his face pale, his eyes wide. We both sat there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. I wasn't sure if I should say something, or if it would just make things worse. Finally, the driver just started the car again. He didn't say a word. We drove in silence, the only sound being the hum of the engine and the occasional flutter of tree branches brushing against the car. I didn't say anything either. I couldn't. I was too freaked out. It was as if both of us were afraid to acknowledge what had just happened. We reached my place a while later, and I didn't even look behind me when I got out of the car. I just hurried into the house, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind me. The silence inside my home felt suffocating. I went straight to my bedroom, curled up in bed, and hugged my cat for comfort. I even grabbed my old stuffed pony from when I was a kid. Yeah, I still have it. Don't judge me. I wasn't taking any chances. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face pale still, staring out the window. I could almost hear her voice in my head, repeating, "Let me off here." I don't know what I experienced that night. I don't know if I was just too tired, or if it was the darkness playing tricks on me. But the whole thing felt off, like she wasn't human, like she didn't belong in the car at all. Maybe I just picked up a stranger in the wrong place at the wrong time. But part of me is convinced that she wasn't really there. I haven't used rideshare since. Not because I think I'll encounter a ghost or anything, but because I can't shake that feeling. What if there's more to it? Maybe some things aren't meant to be understood. This happened to me about 2 years ago, and to this day, I still get chills thinking about it. It was one of those situations where you think to yourself, this can't be happening. This is some kind of nightmare, but it was all too real. At the time, I was working as a delivery driver for a small pizza place in Pine Grove, about an hour outside of the major city. If you've ever worked food delivery, you know that it's hard work. It's long hours, and sometimes you're dealing with people who either want to tip you with a small smile or not tip you at all. But like any job, it's got its pros and cons. In this case, the pay was decent. One night, I was on a particularly quiet shift, delivering pizzas to the outskirts of town. Pine Grove itself is pretty small, but the surrounding area is rural with long stretches of dark roads, very few street lights, and not much going on. It's the kind of place where people drive their trucks through dirt roads, and there's hardly any traffic at 1 a.m. It was my third delivery of the night, heading toward a house on the very edge of town. As I turned down a long, isolated road, something felt off. There weren't many houses out this way, just a few scattered farm properties. The road was a straight shot with no curves, and there were no other cars around. It's the kind of place where you can drive for miles and not see a soul. As I'm making my delivery, I noticed headlights approaching from behind. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I realized the same car kept passing me. It was a black SUV, but the headlights were oddly bright, and it wasn't just driving by. It was slowing down as it passed, and then speeding up again, only to pass me again. I thought maybe it was just some local guy who had nothing better to do. I wasn't in any rush, so I didn't think to stop or pay too much attention. But after the third time it passed me, I started getting that uneasy feeling. I stopped the car, letting it roll to a slow stop, and just sat there watching the SUV. It made a U-turn and started driving back toward me. But instead of passing me again, It pulled up behind me and just stopped right in the middle of the road. At that point, I had a bad feeling, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they needed directions, I told myself. But then they revved the engine, and that's when I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just a normal interaction. I've been driving these roads for a while, and I knew people out here didn't act like that. I figured the best thing I could do was get out of there. I started my car, put it in gear, and tried to pass them as quickly as possible. But as I did, I heard the tires screech behind me, and then the unmistakable sound of an engine gunning for speed. I knew immediately they were chasing me, and I was in way over my head. I slammed my foot on the gas, but my little hatchback didn't stand a chance. It didn't take long for them to catch up. Before I knew it, I felt the heavy thud of their vehicle slamming into my rear bumper. And then bang, the sound of gunshots rang out. I could feel the car shake as the bullets hit my rear window, shattering glass all over the seat. The panic set in. My heart was racing. I had no idea what was happening or why these people were after me. Without thinking, I swerved hard, trying to get away from them, and drove straight into a dirt field just off the road. My tires kicked up dust and rocks as I sped through the field, hoping like hell I could lose them. But they weren't giving up. They followed me. But then something happened. Their SUV hit a patch of mud or a rock, and suddenly the car spun out of control, veering off to the side and crashing into a fence. I wasn't about to wait around and see if they recovered. I floored it, heading straight toward the nearest house I could see. I didn't care whose house it was. At this point, I was desperate. I pulled into the driveway, jumped out of my car, and began banging on the door like a madman. My only hope was that whoever lived there didn't think I was some kind of crazy lunatic trying to break in. But the thought of being out in that field with the crazies in the SUV still on my tail was way scarier than anything else. After what felt like an eternity, a light clicked on and a man opened the door. He was shirtless, wearing just a pair of boxer shorts, and he looked like he'd just woken up. One of his friends was with him, holding a rifle. I thought, great, here's another potential threat. But then, to my surprise, he didn't immediately point the gun at me. Instead, he asked me what the hell was going on, and I quickly explained everything. It turned out he was getting married the next day, and his friends had been having a bachelor party. Thankfully, none of them were drunk enough to make the situation worse. We went inside, called the cops, and by some miracle, they managed to track down the SUV, though no one was ever caught. I filed a police report, but the whole thing just evaporated. No one else came forward with a similar story, and no one ever found that black SUV again. As for me, I went back to the pizza place after that night, but I was never the same. My car was left with a busted window, some serious damage to the rear, and one bullet hole that still hasn't been fully repaired. What really messes with me, though, is that we never found the bumper. It was just gone. No trace of it anywhere. It was like it vanished into thin air. That night I thought I was done for, but somehow I made it out alive. I haven't delivered pizza since, and I don't think I ever will again. Stay alert, folks. The world is a weird place, and not everyone you meet is out for your best interests. My deliveries for the day were finally done. It had been the day from hell. 3 customers had gotten upset because their order was wrong. Not that I had anything to do with that. The orders are called out or emailed in. The warehouse fills them. I pick them up and deliver them. It's as simple as that. Except today, I guess my flat tire on the interstate didn't help me get done in a timely manner. And ironically, the speeding ticket as I tried to get back on schedule threw me even further behind. When it rains, it pours, I thought. Well, it must be monsoon season. I just finished with my last customer. I guess finished isn't quite right. They were closed by the time I got there. So I left the parts sitting by the garage door and hoped it didn't rain. At that point, I can't say I cared if it did. I was so frustrated I could have spit nails. I slammed the roller door down and stormed to the cab of the truck. The last stop was the furthest away from the terminal. It would take me a full 2 hours to get back. I was not a happy camper. Not only was this the longest stretch of my run, it was the most boring. To call it in the middle of nowhere would be an understatement. The sun had set around an hour ago, and the darkness had crept in. Only on this road, it wasn't just darkness. It was oppressive darkness, the kind that you can almost feel, the kind that makes you close your eyes in self-defense. Because at least that darkness you can control. I aimed my truck toward the terminal and drove off into the inky soup of night. It wasn't that there were no stores or gas stations. There was nothing out here, not a single house for miles, no street lights, no glow on the horizon of a looming town. Nothing, just a 2-lane black ribbon on the ground, straight as an arrow. No rises or falls, no turns, just straight. For miles it was flanked by trees. Horrible, oppressive trees. The kind that seem to close in like a giant tunnel that's collapsing, threatening to crush me. Then as I drove, the trees disappeared, and there was nothing but open field. At first it was a relief, but then I realized just how deep and dark the night was. I glanced to the side and saw nothing but nothing, and more nothing. After a while, it felt like I was driving on a 2-lane bridge that hovered over 1,000 feet in the air over a sea of darkness. One slip off the side, and I'd never return. But the darkness didn't just oppress, it called to me. It sang a siren song telling me to rest my eyes, that everything would be okay. My eyes snapped open, and I shook my head, trying to shake away the tiredness. A straight road loomed out in front of me, staring at me, leering at me, daring me to make it back. Desperate to do something, anything to keep me awake, I switched on the radio. 5 minutes later, I switched it off in frustration. No radio stations. Seriously, not even some weak AM Bible thumper station or some lame country station. My eyes felt like they were made of lead. In desperation, I sang to myself. I'm glad no one can hear this, I thought, as I caterwauled my favorite rock tune. I was getting into it as the miles crawled by. I started drumming on the steering wheel. Next, I was pounding on the dashboard. The louder I got, the more things I found to drum on my leg, the passenger seat, the back wall of the cab. I stopped singing in a heartbeat when the wall of the cab pounded back. I froze. I felt like I was doing that weird scene from horror flicks, where the camera is moving backward, but zooming in at the same time. That didn't happen, I told myself. I imagined it. I went back to my percussion, avoiding hitting the back wall, even though I knew it had been my imagination. Or had it? I glanced back, as though it would somehow give me the answer. It didn't. The miles continued to roll by underneath me, as staying awake was no longer a problem. If it was just your imagination, then why don't you hit the wall again? I thought. I glanced back at the wall, as if it had asked the question. It still sat there, blank, unassuming, taunting me. Miles rolled by, sweat formed. I laughed at myself. What an idiot I'm being. Of course it was my imagination. But I still didn't hit the wall. 5 more minutes of this, and I was on the brink of insanity, openly arguing with myself. Fine, I'll do it if it'll make you happy, I thought in my rage. I slammed my fist against the wall. You say, there's nothing. That's when the wall pounded back. One single loud thump. I'd like to say that there was a box in the back that just happened to fall at the exact same time. But I knew the back was completely empty. I'd like to say that the puddle on the driver's side floor of the cab was a soda that I'd spilled, but it wasn't. Sweat poured down my face like the river that flowed down the inside of my pants. I was so totally terrified that I just kept driving. It was like the truck was on full autopilot, and I'd stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. My frozen mind was stuck in neutral as I tried to think of what to do. Denial was weak at that point, but still tried to make a run at the situation when the pounding started again. Thump, thump, thump. The wall moved with every impact. Whoever or whatever was back there, it was big and it was strong. What do? I thought to myself, but my mind had vacated without leaving a forwarding address. I kept driving. Thump. I saw the first crack in the wall. It's breaking through, I thought. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior. The frigid wind and snow blowing in on me as those 2 empty eyes stared in at me like a predator, sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It didn't start out like that, of course. When I started out for my morning run, it wasn't snowing. There was snow on the ground. There had been a quick storm with some squalls that left half a foot of the white stuff on the roads just a few days earlier. The state took care of it pretty quickly, and travel was barely interrupted. Everyone was going about their merry way, even me. The fact that I hated winter, even more than driving a truck, never entered my mind. Okay, that was a lie. As I drove down the road, I found myself looking at the small piles of snow along the roadside and cursing them for not being big enough to cancel my run. I had to drive my truck through some pretty empty places, the kind that made you long for anything to break up the monotony of 2 lanes of asphalt surrounded by endless trees. I had to drive that route quite often, and it never got any easier to stay awake. I would even imagine seeing odd things looking out of the trees as I flew by. I knew it was my mind playing tricks on me, trying to scare me into staying alert and not crashing the truck. If it had been a deer or bear or something like that, I would have just laughed it off. But this thing looked like it was out of some nightmare. That's how I knew it wasn't real. There was no way it could exist. So I put it out of my mind and kept on driving. Fortunately, with it being a 2-day run, I was able to pick up where I wanted to stay after I got my load. Hotels were nice, but if needed, I had the sleeper in my cab, which I called home away from home. It wasn't bad as cramped spaces go. There was lots of shelf space above the bunk. I had a TV mounted on the wall hooked up to a GameCube. There was a DVD player with an assortment of movies that I rotated out on a weekly basis. And there were some paperback books. I didn't have to worry about being bored. The only thing I really needed was food and a bathroom. I had snacks stashed around, sometimes in places even I didn't find for months. But it couldn't compare to a nice hot meal. I had my favorite stops on the road, and they all had two things in common: good food and a quiet place to park and sleep. I didn't like having my truck squashed up against other trucks, wondering if I would be able to get my door open if they parked like an idiot. I liked parking near the outskirts of a parking lot. It was more private, and I didn't feel as hemmed in. Of course, there was a trade-off. More privacy meant walking further to get to the truck stop. Sometimes a lot further, but I used that to my advantage. Nothing like a nice long walk to get the blood flowing to all the muscles I didn't use when driving. Unfortunately, the place was a local mom and pop operation, which meant they didn't have the money to stay open 24 hours a day. Usually, I would pull my truck into my spot in the evening, go get supper at the lunch counter, then grab supplies for the night. I'd always go inside one last time to use the restroom just before they closed at midnight. That evening, I followed the same pattern. Pulled in, walked to the store, got some supper, and went back in around 11:30 for the restroom and supplies before going back to my truck and falling asleep. Normally, I try to keep a good watch on upcoming weather. For whatever reason, I hadn't that day. I woke up around 8 a.m. and looked out to a sea of white. It had snowed, and it had snowed hard. It looked like someone wanted to make up for the snow quota this winter, and did it all in 8 hours. I dressed in my cold weather gear and went out to see how bad it was, and if my truck would be going anywhere today. When I jumped out of the cab, my legs disappeared. There was at least 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was still putting it down. I trudged around the truck to make sure everything was okay, then got back in the cab, brushing off as much snow as I could first. I climbed into the bunk and turned on the news to the announcement that a major blizzard had hit the area. Well, I thought, that's some great investigative reporting right there. They were calling for another foot before the snow stopped. Great. Time to call the boss and get my ear chewed off. Why can't you get here? He growled. There's this stuff called snow, I said. It lands on the ground and piles up until it begins to impede travel. All right, smartass. When do you think you can be here? Well, seeing that I haven't even seen a snow plow go by, and I'm sitting in a parking lot that probably won't get plowed out until much later than the highways. On top of that, my tires are nearly bald even though I've been telling you for months that they needed changing. I'll say I have no earthly clue when you'll see your precious cargo. He was silent for a long moment. Do you like your job? He said through barely restrained fury. Not particularly, I said, then added, when the weather's like this, you might want to update your resume. With that, the line went dead. Thank you for your support, I said to the dial tone. I settled back in, turned off the TV, and went back to sleep. When I first started out trucking, a fellow driver gave me a tip that I never forgot. Anytime you have the chance to get some rest, take it. That little tidbit helped me tremendously over the years. A little extra sleep means a lot less coffee. When I woke up a few hours later and peeked outside, it was still snowing. I looked out my driver's side window, and even my tracks were gone. I was feeling the call of nature, and decided to brave the elements to take the trek to the truck stop for some relief. I felt a little silly for putting on all my cold weather gear, including my gloves and goggles. That feeling didn't last long. It was snowing so hard I couldn't even see the truck stop. I drew an invisible line with the side of my truck, aimed in that direction, and started walking. I never read Call of the Wild. I never saw Alive. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have been so eager to throw myself out into this blizzard just to go pee. Trudging through the snow and the driving wind was growing old quickly. I felt like I should have reached the truck stop by now. I paused and looked around. Two realizations hit me at the same time. First, I couldn't see the truck stop. Second, I could no longer see the truck. As a lovely addition, my tracks were quickly disappearing. I tried to focus on my path toward the truck stop and began trudging again. 15 minutes later, I believe by sheer luck, I saw the store appear off to the right. My track hadn't been dead on, but I was close enough to find the place. My winter gear was starting to fail me, especially with the wind finding all the little places it could inject frigid air. As I approached, I breathed a sigh of relief at getting in out of the cold, not to mention a massive cup of steaming hot coffee. I reached for the front door, but it refused to open. Maybe it was frozen shut. I pulled harder, but nothing happened. I looked in through the glass and saw no lights on. It struck me how the walkway wasn't shoveled either. Oh no, I thought, the storm has them stuck at home. My hopes for a nice warm toilet and a steaming hot cup of coffee plummeted. I took one last forlorn look at the dark store and turned back toward my truck. My disappointment grew as I realized my tracks were gone. I was now snow-blind and navigating without a compass or any other means of direction. I tried to draw an invisible line with the outer wall of the store and hoped it would lead me back to my truck. I felt my cold, wet feet protest as I headed back toward the warmth of my truck. I hugged my jacket, attempting to keep the wind out. The snow was up past my knees now and seemed like trudging through mud. In retrospect, it would have been better for me to wait in the truck until I saw a snow plow in the parking lot. I had plenty of empty bottles for bathroom emergencies, but there was no use chiding myself now. I had to get back to the truck to keep this mistake from becoming a fatal one. If I got lost and couldn't find the truck, no one would come looking for me. They might not find my frozen body until spring thaw. That was a cheery thought, as if my journey hadn't been hard enough. After a while, something caught my foot and sent me sprawling face first in the snow. I struggled to right myself and quickly wiped the snow from my face, silently thanking God that I had worn the goggles. I tried to get my bearings again. Curiosity nagged at me. What had I tripped on in the middle of a parking lot? I dug down and discovered the offending object. It was a parking space barrier. I chuckled for a moment, until I realized to my horror that I should never have come near any of these in the middle of the lot. In fact, a straight trail from the store to the truck. The barrier I had tripped on would be a couple of dozen yards to the right. I scraped the rest of it off and saw it was running nearly parallel to my path. I had veered off course badly. The bright side was I now had a point of reference and hopefully could correct my course. I looked around and found myself adrift in a sea of white. The store had disappeared, and the truck was nowhere to be found. I took a deep breath and used the barrier to aim toward where the truck should be. I remembered one key fact in the process. These barriers lined the edge of the parking lot, and just past them was a drop-off. In retrospect, it was lucky I tripped on it instead of stepping over it and rolling down a hill that I might never make it back up again. I turned to aim myself where I thought my truck was when out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow of a figure walk by. I couldn't be sure because the blowing snow made visibility nearly impossible more than a few yards away. It could have just been my imagination. I'd been out in the cold for much longer than I planned, and it was time to get back to the truck. I was suddenly reminded why I got out of the truck to begin with. I had to pee so badly, I did a quick look and saw nothing but snow. So I whipped it out and let it go. I think whipped it out was a bit of an oversimplification. I fought to unzip my frozen zipper as my bladder screamed a full red alert that it was about to release the floodgates, whether I was ready or not. I finally got it out and started the yellow stream when the wind shifted direction, sending it spraying all over my pants. I quickly turned so that the stream was downwind. When I finished, I looked down at the front of my now wet pants and swore internally. Yet another reason to find the truck quickly. Wet pants turned to frozen pants, turned to dangerous pants. I looked down at the barrier, now covered in flecks of yellow snow, and started on my new course. The snow had not let up one bit, and my energy started to wane even though I'd just been standing around for the last 10 minutes. Trudging through nearly waist-high snow was making me more tired than I had been in a long time. The wind rushing in my ears tore away my hearing. There wasn't anything out here to listen to, and yet I thought I heard something. I looked around but only saw white. Was this my mind starting to play tricks on me like it did when I was driving and thought I saw the creature that doesn't exist peeking out at me from the trees? I turned back to my imagined destination, wondering if delusions were the first step in freezing to death. As if to answer, the wind hit me with a solid gust, knocking me down. If I didn't know better, I'd swear I felt a giant hand in the middle of my back before I fell. I looked up and saw nothing but snow swirling around, making mini tornadoes. I chuckled at the irony of them being called snow devils. I guess my own personal snow devil was pushing me around. I got up and started for the truck again. Every step felt like my feet were encased in concrete. I plodded on, trying to pull from whatever reserve energy I had to keep going. I couldn't die in the middle of a parking lot, just yards away from my nice warm truck. That would be the ultimate irony. I walked on, barely conscious, wanting only my 18-wheeled safe harbor from this merciless storm. My head was down. I wasn't even looking anymore. It didn't make any difference. Suddenly, I slammed into something and fell back. The snow was so deep, I just lay there, like a turtle unable to get off my back. I looked up and saw the thing that had hit me was the back corner of the truck. 2 feet to the right, and I would have missed it. I smiled, but it took a lot of energy. I focused everything I had into getting up. Adrenaline took care of the rest. I marched up to the driver's side door, and reached into my pocket for the key to unlock it. I couldn't find the key. I ripped off my glove and searched again. Still no key. Despair smothered my mind. If I had dropped it one of the times I fell in the snow, it was lost forever. And so was I. I leaned against the truck door, so close and yet so far. I could almost feel the heat through it. I smashed my fist into my leg in frustration, but felt more pain than I should have. I patted the other pocket and felt a lump. I tore off my other glove and reached into the pocket, pulling out the holiest of holies, the key. Tears streamed down my face and quickly froze as I stuck the key in the lock and opened the door. It took every ounce of energy I had left to climb up into the cab and collapse into the driver's seat. A wave of heat washed over me. For the longest time, I just sat there, until I mustered the strength to start pulling off my cold, weather gear one piece at a time. I threw them into the passenger seat until I sat in my underwear only. I leaned my seat back and basked in the warmth that flowed over me like an ocean wave. I imagined sitting on a beach with the sun shining down on me and the water beckoning. I fell asleep like this. I woke to a sore back and stretched as best as I could in my seat, then looked out the windshield. The snow seemed to have let up a little bit, and the wind wasn't nearly as fierce as before. There was still no sign of a plow, and there was no way I was getting anywhere without one. Off in the distance, I could almost see the outline of the store. I wasn't going there again until the parking lot was plowed, but looking around, I couldn't imagine how long that might be. There was at least 3 feet of snow already on the ground, and it was still putting some down. I crawled into the bunk and covered up for a serious nap. Hours later, I was starting to feel refreshed. I rolled over and turned on the TV, trying to see how bad things were. I couldn't even pick up the local station, so I stuck in a movie. After it was done, I decided I should probably take stock of my supplies, since I might be here for a while. I had plenty of snacks, chips, pretzels, and jerky, among other things. As long as I didn't binge, I should have been fine. I had drinks in the mini fridge too, but water wasn't a concern. All I had to do was bring some snow inside and melt it. I only needed to check one last thing to make sure I could outlast this storm. I looked at the fuel gauge. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the fuel gauge again. I only had a quarter tank left. That might last, it might not, depending on how long it took to get plowed out. Obviously, once the plow freed me, I could drive 100 yards or so to a gas pump. As I was looking at the fuel gauge, my eyes drifted to the windshield and the field of white that stretched out in front of me. The snow had finally stopped. How long would that last? I had no idea. I could finally see the store clearly, but I could also clearly see that it remained closed. It was hard to believe anyone would be plowing that amount of snow anywhere. I guess that's why they had the drop-off along the edges of the parking lot. As I softly chuckled at my realization, my eyes caught movement. There was some kind of animal walking around in the parking lot. At first, I thought it was a deer because of the white horns on its head. But the longer I looked, the more I realized this creature was something else. It seemed bigger than any deer I'd ever seen. Its torso rode above the snow like it was a ship. Its face looked like it had wasted away to the bare skull, and it had massive teeth that went far beyond its jaw. It was rather haunting to look at. It was sniffing around in the snow. The more I thought about it, I began to realize that was probably the spot where I had taken a leak. I was mesmerized and horrified by this thing at the same time. I was nearly convinced my mind was playing tricks on me. When it looked right at me, my blood turned to ice. Its look pierced my soul. It made me wish I'd never come to this place. When it took its first step in my direction, I dove back into the sleeper and drew the curtain. I shook for reasons that had nothing to do with the temperature and was breathing in panicked gasps. What was that thing? Did I really see what I thought I saw? How could a creature like that exist? I tried to settle down and get my breathing back to normal, but my mind refused to let go of the image of that thing. I just imagined it, I told myself. It's just a deer roaming around out there. I told myself the same thing over and over until my mind finally believed it. However, I didn't look through the curtain to confirm it. I didn't call it denial. I called it not pushing my luck. I pulled out a pack of cheese crackers and turned on the first Die Hard movie to try and forget about the deer that's outside. I was 15 minutes into that movie when I felt the first nudge. I didn't know what else to call it. It felt like something just nudged my truck. It was almost like when a strong wind gust pushed the cab, but I didn't hear any wind outside. The two sides of my mind engaged in a shouting match over whether I should check it out or ignore it. Fear threw its 2 cents in, and ignore it won out until the second nudge. Actually, it was like the 5th or 6th nudge, until curiosity took over and made me go take a look. I peeked through the curtain and didn't see anything but snow through the windshield. I climbed out and looked through the passenger side window, but I saw nothing. I chided myself for my skittishness. When I looked through the driver's side window and saw a set of horns, I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but they were gone. There were tracks in the snow that looked like deer tracks, but only bigger. Or was that my imagination carrying me away again? I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the creature poking at my tires with its horns. I was fairly sure it couldn't puncture one with just horns, but I didn't want to chance it. I reached down, grabbed my club, and reached for the door to scare it away. But again, it was gone. I was beginning to question my sanity. Was this thing real? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? Or was this creature toying with me, trying to draw me out of the truck? I closed the door and went back to my movie, but I couldn't get the creature out of my head. I was on pins and needles, waiting, listening, anticipating the next nudge. Before the movie was over, I fell into a fitful sleep. I was in a tall building, and there were bad guys everywhere. I had a machine gun, but had been better served hiding and picking them off one by one. I was sneaking up on one who was standing guard on an isolated floor when I turned the corner, and there stood the deer creature. It was massive, standing on its hind legs, and its horns scraped the ceiling. It looked at me with those empty eye sockets from its bare skull face. It made a sound that was half grunt, half growl, then started towards me. I backed away around the corner, trying to get back to my hiding space. But as I turned to run, suddenly the creature was in front of me. I pulled up my machine gun and started firing short bursts. I hit it in the chest, but it kept coming. As I backed away, I shot it several times in the head. I watched as chunks of bone flew, but it kept coming at me as if it didn't care. I shot at its legs, hoping to throw it off balance, but it had no effect. As if it had had enough, it charged, pinning me to a wall with its horns. I looked down as the blood began to seep from my belly, around its horns. It pulled back and charged me again and again, sending shock waves of pain through my body and crushing my spine. It pulled back and allowed me to fall to the floor. Blood pooled around me as I tried to crawl away from the creature. I could only use my arms. I couldn't feel anything below my waist, which was a partial blessing because it cut my pain in half. After I'd crawled a few feet, I suppose it had enough of toying with me. It stomped its foot down on my neck, so hard I heard a snap, and my arms went dead. I could feel it tear into my back, ripping away pieces of meat. I could hear the sickening chewing and slurping as I was eaten alive. I woke with a start, sweat pouring from my forehead, and looked around the sleeper cab looking for the creature that was tearing me to pieces. After a few seconds, I came to the realization it had been a nightmare. I turned off my DVD player and stuck my head out through the curtain to check on my fuel situation. The needle was below the quarter mark, almost down to an eighth. I looked out through the windshield. The snow had not magically melted. In fact, the wind had picked up, and now it was starting to drift. Where there was once an even field of snow, now there were peaks and valleys forming like dunes in the desert. The storm was still dark, and there was no traffic moving on the road. The sun was riding low in the sky, and I had yet to see another living soul. I wondered if my fuel would last until a plow could rescue me. Soon I would have to give some serious thought to conserving it. It wasn't ideal. The thought of bundling up in blankets in the dark with no heater and no TV to watch wasn't exciting me. But it was better than waiting until my fuel ran out and I froze to death. As I killed the engine, I chided myself for not coming up with this plan sooner. I would have conserved fuel when the sun was out and the temperatures were higher. Now I was going to pay for my lack of foresight. I dug out every blanket I had stored in my closets and laid them over the bed, then tucked in for a long nap. When I woke, I was drowning in utter darkness. I panicked for a moment before I remembered where I was. I looked at my watch, and it was 4 a.m. I pulled the covers off me and was immediately assaulted by cold air. I grabbed a flashlight and found my way into the cab. I turned the key on and waited with bated breath that billowed out in clouds that filled the cab until the engine turned over. As it roared to life, I felt even colder. I looked to my left and froze. My driver's side window lay in pieces on the seat and floor. I slowly turned to look at the passenger side window when fear grabbed me. There was a face looking in at me, but it wasn't a human face. It was the ungodly face of the dear creature that had gored me to death in my dream. A river ran down my leg, forming a yellow puddle on the floor as I stared into the dark, hollow eyes of this thing sent straight from hell. It reared its head back and then smashed into my passenger's window, splintering it. It reared back again, and this time shattered the window, reaching in for me with its fierce, long teeth. I jumped back and landed in the driver's seat full of glass. I knew I was dead. There was nothing I could do. I sat there as it entered the cab, coming for me. Its head was halfway inside when it suddenly stopped. It moved around a bit, then roared in frustration. Its horns were too wide to fit in the window. It tried over and over to get in, but there was no way it could fit with those horns. As suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. I looked around to see where it had gone, but the darkness of night covered it like a shroud. As I was looking, it silently reached behind me and would have had me if it hadn't breathed out, warning me of its approach. I dove into the center console as its deadly jaw snapped shut right where my spine had been. It continued its assault on this window, gaining ferocity as it frustrated itself by not being able to get a hold of me where I stood in between the two windows, hoping I was safe from either direction. It was then I decided to go back into my bunk and close the curtain. I covered up and reached underneath the bunk to a secret compartment and pulled out my .40 caliber automatic handgun. I took the magazine out and made sure it was loaded with all 10 rounds, then put it back in, pulled back the slide, and flicked on the safety. It made me feel a bit better, but not much. I didn't know how true my dream was, or if bullets would do anything to this monster. I no longer had any illusions that this was a deer. It was something much more dangerous and terrifying, and it was after me. I covered up with my blankets again, holding my gun close. The heater wasn't doing much good with 2 windows broken out. I would try to do something about them in the morning when it was light. There was no way I was doing anything in the dark with that thing lurking out there. I lay there for an hour watching every second of the clock tick by, eyes wide open, ears listening for any sound. But there was none, just the wind howling in between the 2 broken windows, making my curtains flutter. Eventually, I recognized the futility of having a truck running and the warm air just escaping before it could get to me. So I got out of my bunk, keeping my new best friend with me, and slowly made my way out to the cab, my head darting left and right to see if the creature was about to launch itself through either of the windows. I turned the key off, and before I could pull it out of the ignition, a set of horns smacked against the frame of the window, and the deadly teeth came in and snapped just inches short of my face. I whipped around and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. It snapped at me again, and I panicked until I realized the safety was on. I flicked it off and aimed, but the monster was gone. I didn't dare make a move toward the window for fear it would launch itself back in at me. I stood still as a statue and stared at the window it had come through, then slowly turned to the other side. I kept looking back and forth between the 2, trying to keep my peripheral vision on both at the same time. I was shaking not only from the cold, but also from the sheer terror of not knowing where or when this thing was going to show itself. I decided my cold weather gear would be my best option, so I climbed back into the bunk and put on as many layers of clothes as I could find. When I popped my head back out, I was met with the most terrifying sight imaginable. The monster had climbed onto the hood of my truck and was now bashing its head against the windshield, trying to make its way inside. I knew the windshield was wide enough that it would be able to get its antlers inside, and I would be done. I pulled the gun up, aimed at its head, and fired. The explosion was massive. I instantly lost my hearing, except for the ringing in my ears. I staggered back, but the monster kept coming. Not only had my bullet done nothing to the monster, it weakened the windshield, making it easier to get inside. The monster shook its head in surprise when the bullet ricocheted off the bone, and then continued its assault on the windshield. It hammered on the glass, until it shattered into a million pieces. I was already aiming at its face and fired 2 shots before the glass even hit the floor. They both ricocheted off its skull, causing it to rear up just enough for me to fire 2 shots into its chest. It didn't collapse screaming in agony like I wanted, but I could tell it didn't like it either. It jumped down off the hood and disappeared. I stared out into the inky blackness, trying in vain to pick up any glimpse of it. I whipped around from one side window to the other and back again, waiting for it to show its horrid face. After what seemed like forever, I saw horns rising through the passenger side window. I fired a shot into its face, and it disappeared. I threw myself back into the passenger seat, when suddenly I saw its head rising in the driver's side window. I fired a shot, making it disappear again. I jumped up and threw myself to the other seat, knowing it would be on the passenger side soon. Sure enough, 10 seconds later it appeared, and I fired another shot. It was toying with me. It disappeared, and I threw myself over to the passenger seat, waiting, aiming at the empty driver's window. But instead, I felt teeth clamp down on my neck. It had fooled me. I shoved my gun up under its skull and fired a shot. If I hadn't been deaf from the first shot, this one right next to my ear would have done it. And yet somehow, I heard it squeal in pain as it released me. I knew I'd been inches from death. I reached up and touched the wound on my neck and came away with a handful of blood. I went back into my bunk, tore away pieces of sheet, and pressed it to my wound. Then I tore some more of the sheet and tied it around my neck to hold the bandage in place. I went back out to the cab only to see it crouching on the hood, waiting for me. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior. The frigid wind and snow blowing in, as those 2 empty eyes stared in at me like a predator, sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It crawled through the remains of the windshield. I knew I was dead. In desperation, I shoved the gun into one of its eye holes and squeezed the trigger. The sound it made was something I'd never heard before and never wanted to hear again. The scream was both a low guttural sound and a high-pitched shriek. It sounded like someone had unleashed a demon from the pits of hell. My mind screamed at me, "Get out of there." I fumbled with the driver's door and ended up falling out when it opened. On a clear day with no snow, I would have gotten a concussion or broken bone falling on the bare asphalt. With 3 feet of snow on the ground, I landed on a soft cloud pillow. It was the only time in the last 24 hours that the snow had helped me. I immediately jumped up and looked around for any place to hide, but there was nowhere. Everything was covered in snow. I glanced back at the trailer and realized the snow was so high that it reached the bottom of the trailer. I couldn't see underneath at all. I quickly dove under it, then turned around and tried to pile the snow into the opening to hide where I'd gone. I shone my light around at the beautiful sight of bare asphalt. I lay there on my belly, looking all around, trying to see in every direction at once to see where the monster would attack from. My breath blew out in billows of desperate smoke as I came up empty. There was nothing. The monster wasn't there yet. I didn't dare hope to imagine that my shot had killed it. If anything, it made it even angrier. It was probably destroying the inside of my truck at that very moment. What I didn't trust was that the monster wouldn't find me underneath the trailer. I looked around for anywhere I could use as a better hiding place. My eyes fell on the wheels of the truck. It looked like there was just enough room between the tires and the differential. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was better than that thing finding me. I turned around and slid my feet in first. The further I slid, the tighter it got. Ironically, the grease and oil from the differential helped me slide through a little easier. When I almost had my shoulders through, it suddenly felt too tight. I was stuck. I couldn't move forward or backward. Panic flooded my mind, and I struggled frantically like I couldn't breathe. After the longest minute of my life, I finally managed to maneuver my shoulders through and into my hiding spot. The hood of my coat did double duty of keeping me warm and completing my hiding place. I lowered it to the level of the asphalt and would raise it just an inch when I wanted to look out. The first half hour was the worst. The ringing in my ears had begun to subside, but I still didn't hear anything outside of my own breathing. The cold slowly leaked through my clothes. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour passed. My muscles started to cramp up. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour. I felt like my bladder would burst. Still no monster. During the long boredom in between, I pulled the magazine out of the gun and counted how many bullets I had left. No matter how many times I counted, it always came out to the same number, 1. I knew one bullet wouldn't save me from the monster. There was only one thing I could do with one bullet: end my suffering if it found me. I took it out of the magazine and stared at it. I used my coat to shine it up, then stared at my reflection in the gleaming metal. The edges of the snow around the trailer began to glow. I knew the sun was coming up. Darkness was no longer my friend. I was about to give up and crawl out of my hiding place when I heard it. A soft sniffing sound. I lifted my hood up an inch, just enough to peek out, and there it was. Its head had broken through the wall of snow close to where I dove under the trailer. There were a few drops of blood from my neck wound, and it was sniffing them. Those drops would lead it right to me. Sure enough, it took a turn toward the front of the trailer and looked in my direction. I lay there still as stone as it inched its way toward me. It was having trouble squeezing its massive body under the trailer, and I could hear it growling with frustration. It came closer, crawling right toward me. There was no doubt it knew I was there. I closed my eyes and stuck the barrel of the gun under my chin. I felt its hot breath and smelled the stench of death as I squeezed the trigger. Suddenly it shrieked, and I could feel the truck bucking above me. I opened my eyes to the most amazing sight. Its horns had gotten caught in the chains hanging down underneath the trailer, and it was tangled. It screamed and bucked and fought to be free from its metal captors. It yanked backwards so hard, I felt the truck move sideways an inch. The differential was pressing on me now, and I had to shimmy over to avoid being crushed. I watched as the chains broke away one by one, and then it was free. I took the opportunity to crawl out from under the truck. It was a useless hiding place now. It had already tracked me. I was almost out when I heard another sound and saw a shadow pass by the other side of the truck. It was coming back, but it was trying from the other side. I crawled as quickly as I could. This was my chance. If it searched from the other side, it might not know I'd left. I had no idea where I would go. but it was better to be out of a useless hiding place. Besides, I desperately needed to stretch and pee. As I stood next to the truck, I saw a large patch of red in the snow. I guess shooting it wasn't as useless as I thought. I took care of business first, peeing before I ruined another pair of pants. I finished and thought about where to hide. I looked up at the ruined cab of my truck, and the nightmare crept around the corner. I stood there helpless. It had caught me flat-footed. I had nowhere to go. It stared at me as it limped around the corner. Its eyes seemed to exude rage. I pulled up the gun and aimed it when it disappeared in a moving mountain of snow. The snowplow had finally arrived. I watched as the plow pushed its mound of snow past my truck and over the edge of the parking lot. The driver backed up and stopped beside me. "You've been here all night?" the driver asked. "Since before the storm," I replied. "What happened to your truck?" he asked, looking up at my shattered windows. I followed his eyes and thought for a moment. "Someone tried to rob me," I lied, knowing the truth was unbelievable. "I see you took care of it," he said, looking at the gun in my hand. I looked down at the gun and stuck it in my waistband. "It's been one hell of a night," I said. "Well, don't worry. The roads are getting cleared, and I'll get you plowed out of here," he said to me. "Thanks," I replied. He nodded and backed up to continue plowing. I looked at where he just plowed beside my truck and saw a long smear of red. I followed it to the edge of the parking lot and looked over the side with my hand on my gun. The drop-off was a good 10 feet or more, and the snow had already started to pile up. I followed the path of red down the hill with my eyes and saw antlers poking out of the snow. I stared at them, looking for any movement. For 10 minutes I watched, and they didn't move. I was interrupted when the plow pushed another pile of snow over the side, covering the antlers. I watched for another 5 minutes just to be sure. The plow guy pulled up beside me. "You okay?" he asked, and I pulled my eyes away from the snow pile. "Yeah, I'm good," I replied. "Are you sure?" he continued, pointing at my neck. "Yeah, I just got nicked by some glass," I said, remembering the teeth of the monster clamping down on my neck. "Well, I think someone just pulled into the store," he said. "Maybe you should get something for that." "I will." "Thanks," I said, knowing I would do no such thing. I wanted to avoid as many questions as possible. I climbed into the cab, brushed the glass off my seat, and drove over to the fuel pumps. After filling up, I started the long trip home. I kept my cold weather gear and mask on, having no windows or windshield made for a frigid trip. The heater was on max and aimed at my feet, keeping the bottom half of me warm. I didn't call for a tow truck because I wanted to get away from there. I never went back to that truck stop again. I didn't want to take the chance of that thing being alive. I never told anyone else about the harrowing encounter. I wish I could erase it from my mind. As I drove towards my home terminal through the endless stretch of trees, I saw one of the creatures peeking out at me that I used to think was my imagination. Now I know better. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.